We have some presentations ahead of you for this evening. That's where we're going to start out with the agenda. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Cascade, and then the boards, the collective board, Paul and Dunbar, are going to speak together, discuss the issues, and you can listen in to our discussion at the end. Dr. Cascade?
Thank you. A couple quick notes for all here, though this is being recorded. It's being streamed on YouTube. There are people in the room, and there are about 4 people on the Google Meet, so it's kind of a hybrid meeting for that. So the goal tonight is to present the SAU 67 Comprehensive Reopening Plan and to the SAU board for review, discussion, comment. If at any time a board member wants to stop a presenter and ask a question, please do so. If not, let's get through the presentation and ask questions because it's a long presentation. So please feel free, you and the board, led by your SAU board chair, you can do whatever you need to do. Next slide, please, Roy. So we start with Dr. Chan's goals. And if you look at the first 2 goals, we want to maximize the in-person educational experience and minimize the risk of COVID-19 to students and staff. And we have spent a long time looking at the clash and balance of those 2 goals. Sometimes decisions you make for the first one impact the second one, and vice versa. The way I thought about this, we want infection control and school as normal as possible. There are long-term impacts and effects of not controlling COVID, and there are long-term impacts and effects of students not going to in-person school. And we're balancing those 2 goals against each other. For me, education is fundamentally a human relationship process, and it's very hard to accomplish in a remote environment. But I want to point you to the 3rd bullet, because that has been a foundation of our plan. Flexibility, multiple learning options, and movement between learning models. As you go forward and you look at that 3rd bullet is one that I see as very important because the context will evolve and change. We're not only talking tonight about how to open schools, but also how they are going to run for this year and decisions that we have to make. Next slide, please. I always start with our mission statement. We care for each person every day. Now that care starts with listening. It does not mean that everyone gets their way. Because as I care for one person, those goals may be diametrically opposed to caring for another. But care starts with listening, and through this process, we've tried to do that. The second statement is focused on learning. It's very easy in this planning process to get caught up in operations, how we're going to do things, spacing, schedules, plans for infection control. But I've really tried to keep learning as the forefront and focus of the plan that we're looking at. And finally, we teach to touch the future. And in this case, the future is here. Our educational model has changed and is changing, and we are rapidly moving into the future. This next one is just a note about me personally and a journey that I've taken myself. People are wonderful things, but they definitely complicate anything that we do. I started my career as a biologist, and then I became an educator of social science. And I had to deal with the concept of perception and how perception impacts the interpretation of facts. As a scientist, I was always of the understanding that if we could just get to the facts and use our rationality, we could all come to consensus. And then I find out that 2 people can look at the exact same circumstance and come away with different facts. And I think that's even more so in today's society. It's very hard to get consensus on what the facts are. And we've been having a number of conversations in our country about that, some around race, some around COVID, and some around interpretation of what is actually out there. However, I started as a scientist. I'm still very data-driven, and I think we need to look at data as we make decisions. We just need to understand that people can look at the same data and come to different conclusions. And finally, I believe we need to come to consensus. We need to take into account and respect the diverse perspectives of our community, and we need to try to make a plan that is the best for the most people. We need to listen carefully. We need to listen beyond words for meaning, focus on problem solving, and try to get win-win solutions. People are passionate, and I encourage you to be passionate, but I also encourage us to be nice. As a community, we can't destroy each other in this process of planning. Next slide, please. A little note about public education. I didn't start in public education. I started in private education. I have come to be a firm believer that public school is the best place for a child to be. As far as diversity, as far as education in what they should be as a community member, and also meeting the needs of that child. If I look at publication at the federal and state level around this COVID crisis, there's a lot of politics and there is a move toward privatization. This crisis is being used to drive money away from public schools toward private entities. In New Hampshire, our public schools belong to the local community. That is absolutely clear. We had state guidance issued on July 14th. It gave us minimum standards that we have to look at, and it made clear that there were going to be local decisions. And so here we are tonight in front of the SAU 67 board, talking about the local decisions that we have to make. There are a few hard boundaries. There is no statewide or regional plan, and that has created its own problem. Districts have diverged, and because our districts are interconnected by families and where people work and where people send their kids to school, that has brought more complexity to this problem. I am bringing tonight a recommended plan. It has been developed by me, the superintendent, as the chief administrative officer of SAU 67. It is my recommendation to the board. The board will look at this recommendation, ask questions, discuss, and eventually they will have to make a decision on whether or not this plan is one accepted for SAU 67. But I did not do this alone. I just want to mention a few people. Wayne Ford cannot be here tonight. He does finances, facilities, food service, and transportation. I will be covering his slides. Marcia Kelly is an SAU administrator. She does special needs and also is in charge of nursing. She'll be covering those slides tonight. I'll introduce Dr. Shannon Bartlett in a minute. She is our new, started July 1, curriculum assessment instruction, professional development person. Our four principals are in the room, and they are going to present slides on their particular buildings. And Brian O'Connell High School, Adam Osborne Memorial School, Lori Kruger Bow Elementary School, Owen Harrington Dunbarton Elementary School. Beyond that, we have something we call the A+ team. There's a number of district administrators, assistant principals, athletic director, counselors, and they have definitely had input on the plan. Our SAU nurses have given us input on the plan, and we have, and Marcia will cover that, we have Shannon Donahue at BES, Ricky DaCosta at the high school, Tracy Soros at the middle school. Both of those are new. They came on July 1, and in fact, they've probably given up time this summer when they really aren't under contract. And Emily Kutkowski is at DES. And finally, I've had input from staff and community members, not as much as I would have liked. I put a quote out to the school community a couple days ago. It's an African proverb: if you want to run fast, run alone. If you want to run far, run together. So far, we have run fast. There's been 16 days since the state guidance was released. We have a plan to present. There is a month to school opening, and we need to put that plan out. We need to run together. I've tried to keep the community informed of thinking and issues, but I've had to work quickly. Now this plan is being presented as my recommendation as the board. It will be there for discussion, revision, or adoption as much as possible. There are parts of the plan that are not fully operationalized. I did take the words draft off of everything, but there's also the recognition that there's a lot of operational things that need to be decided, and they are best done at the school level as close to the teachers in the classroom as we can get. And they are not under contract in the summer. So I think that does it for the introduction. And so I am now, oh, nope, I'm sorry. The last thing I wanted to touch on is that historically, there's been a high level of support for the schools by the communities of Bow and Dunbar. These communities have passed budgets, they have passed teachers' contracts, and they have been very supportive to us, and even in the move to emergency remote instruction. In turn, we as the schools need to listen to our community and address the needs that they bring forward. It is a two-way street, and one of my fears in this whole process is there will be a rift developed between the community and the schools, and I don't want to see that happen as much as possible. But we have two goals that will be clashing against each other. All right, I'm ready to be, that's my introduction. Any questions on that before we actually begin the plan? All right, next slide, please. We have developed a plan with 5 operational status levels. We're not really going to talk about the blue, which is the old pre-pandemic days, but I do look forward with faith that we will get beyond this pandemic eventually and get back to instruction that looks like that. And we have the red, which is complete movement of schools to remote instruction, like we did by executive order last year. The 3 levels that we're going to talk about today, and most of it is going to be the green. The green is what we would consider maybe a new normal. When we did our first poll that kind of with a draft plan out there, we had about 15% of our community say they're not going to send their children to school at all this year. They would like remote instruction for the whole year. We have that in mind as part of the draft guide, as part of the guidance from the state. We're going to have that as an option. But we're looking at about 85% of our people coming in, 5 days a week instruction. There will be some adaptations and things that we have to do, conditions, I think I've called them. The next one is called the yellow plan. It's reduced capacity. That one is not as highly operationalized. I'll talk about it a little later on. But that is some sort of alternating schedule. If you look at other districts and how they have put their plans for, many districts are calling an alternating schedule their hybrid plan. We have tried to use hybrid in this district as a term to address our instructional model. Scheduling can be an alternating schedule. I don't really see that as a hybrid plan. A hybrid plan is our instructional model. We've talked a lot as administrators in the team about what a hybrid is. A hybrid means you have a single instructional design model and an instructional delivery platform that does both in-person and remote instruction. We talked about hybrid cars. It's an electric and a gasoline-powered car in the same vehicle. It's not driving an electric car and then driving a gas-powered car. The same vehicle has both of those. Of course, I talked about hybrid golf clubs. You hit a wood, you hit an iron, you hit a hybrid. It's a single club that has the characteristics of both a wood and an iron. And I've tried to reserve the term hybrid for our instructional model as an instructional model that can switch between remote and in-person. Because we may have a time when we are switching between those two environments. The hybrid thinking goes beyond that. In yellow, we would have to reduce capacity, and we have not fully got to how we would do that. There are a couple ways we could do it. You could do it by levels. You could say K-6 students come, 7 through 12 are fully remote. You could do it by alphabet. An advantage of doing it by alphabet is that keeps families intact if you have to go to an alternating schedule. So we were trying to make sure that families' kids were in school on the same days and not in school, and that would be adjustment. And we've also talked about this may work out voluntarily. It may be that people, if we get to a point where we're in a yellow situation, enough people will decide to go remote instruction that we would have to go there. We need to work on that plan more, but we thought we needed to get the total plan out for people to look at. The plan that we have with these operational levels is a flexible plan that responds to changing environments. We want to keep schools open and keep them open as much as possible for as long as possible. The last level is orange. Orange is remote instruction for all except for priority students. Priority students can be, we haven't fully operationalized it, but determined to be by possible education, those students who must have in-school education to meet their unique learning needs, and also family needs. We have heard a lot from our essential workers. We live in towns that support Concord Hospital, that there are essential workers working on the front lines and they need their children in school. And we want to be responsive to that and say there will be a set of students that we've identified as priority students, but by educational need and family need, that we really need to do all we can to have them in school as much as possible. Okay, next slide, please. This is the overall understanding and matrix of the plan. We've only included green, yellow, and orange on there. We start with the environment. We do realize that we need to operationalize these numbers. It may be similar to a snow day call. However, we've also discussed that maybe this is so important that we may need to pull in the SAU executive board or have school board consultation. We need to develop some guidelines and rubrics about what does it mean to have low community spread and few school cases. We just didn't have the time to develop those numbers in a thoughtful way, so we put them as TBD. But it doesn't mean that if we get one case of COVID in a school, we shut down the whole system. We need to look at what those numbers would be, and we need to look at when we would go from a green level to a yellow level to an orange level, and it needs more. I want to talk a little bit about the green level and the impact. Even in the green level, where we are fully open 5 days a week, individuals and groups are going to be in and out of in-person and remote due to symptoms, quarantining, precautionary isolation. Students and groups will move in and out because of our infection protocols and having to go to remote instruction for as far as infection control. I think the other thing in green, we need an absolute cultural change, that we need people to stay home when they're sick, even mildly. This is going to introduce a lot more absences and variability in planning. I was one of those worker warriors. I came in when I was sick. I can't do that anymore. If I am sick, I need to stay home. We will tell people who come to school and are identified as school as sick, you need to stay home. And additionally, we may tell them you need to stay home for a certain amount of time until COVID can be ruled out. So even in green, and we're open 5 days a week, that means that individuals or groups may not be allowed to come at all times to those 5 days. The next thing that you look at is masks. We have made, or my recommendation is mask use is mandatory for all, with very limited exceptions that might fall into the special needs category. It's absolutely difficult to implement and enforce. I find in my own life, learning how to use this mask and have it on for long periods of time is very difficult. But I've talked to people in the medical field who have done it, and they say after a while it becomes less difficult, never easy. Especially for young children. We've looked at the guidance for K2, especially talks about K2 students who will tend to put their hands on there and adjust it and so forth, that could even be worse for infection spread than having them wear a mask. And right now I have it down as all day, because we want to get to the concept that this is going to be at all times. When the buildings talk, we do know we need to build in mask breaks. I personally can't wear this all day, and we don't, children may not be able to wear them, but I didn't want to put in, we're going to do X, Y, and Z about mask breaks, but the building level is definitely going to look at it. You'll also hear the buildings maybe talk about this a little bit at developmental levels. I've seen a lot of people say, well, I can't have my K2 student come in wearing a mask, and it's going to be difficult, but to me, that's a non-negotiable issue. If you're going to come into our buildings, you have to have a mask on. On top of that, we need to develop a culture. Personally, this blue mask matches my blue shirt now, but I look out and I see other people have much more prettier masks than I do. We need to develop a culture. We need to develop educational campaigns. We need to develop standards on what masks will be allowable. When we talk about PPE, at this point, we're asking the community to supply a lot of the masks. We'll talk about that later on and what the finances are. But we realize that mask wearing is going to be difficult. We did not make the decision lightly. We took into account a lot of guidance. And in my mind, everything I've read, the mask use is the single most effective tool to protect others for infection control. And it is a relatively cost-efficient measure. Dr. Chan referenced the study of a hair salon with 2 COVID-infected workers who in the course of 18 days did not infect others because of mask use and hand washing despite close contact. I know there's probably someone out there who's going to cite a study that says the opposite, but at this point I think masks are non-negotiable and it's our best hope of infection prevention. The next one is social and physical distancing. In the green level, we have a goal of 6 feet and a minimum of 3. When we move to yellow level, we go to a minimum of 6. If we decide to have a minimum of 6, we are in the yellow level. The only way we can fit students into our schools and provide 6 feet of social distancing is to reduce capacity probably to under 50%. We believe, from what we looked at in our buildings, that we can handle about 85% that we expect to come with a goal of 6 and a minimum of 3. I want to make it clear, we go to 6 feet of distancing, it means we are in a yellow situation, which means some sort of alternating schedule to reduce capacity. Again, there are multiple models to reduce capacity. We haven't really gone deeply into that yet. Our focus was on developing the overall plan. Could you just go to the next slide for a minute, please? Here's a quote from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I won't read it to you, just give you a chance to read that quote. Our goal of 6, minimum of 3 comes from state guidance. It comes from looking at the American Academy of Pediatrics. But we recognize that this 6 feet is a particular touch point, and it's one that people get very passionate about. We have, for the green level, we've established what we are. Back to the main slide, please. Screening. We have our Parent Square software that we use. They are developing a module that will allow us to have parents fill out a screening form at home, including taking a temperature at home, and it will have dashboard capabilities so administrators and nurses can very quickly look at the dashboard and see what forms have been filled out or not. We've only seen the product demonstration, which sometimes doesn't match the product that's actually delivered. We expect that to be brought to us before school starts. Symptoms, home temperature checks, and travel are part of the considerations of the screening, although Parent Square was not sure that they would have travel on there. As far as temperature checks, according to our look, they are not recommended by the CDC as far as on-site temperature checks. They're very difficult to implement on a large scale. You can't imagine what it would be like to temperature check 450 students coming into a school. And the CDC and the American Association of Pediatrics say it is not a particularly effective prevention measure. And that is where we are in temperature checks screening. Meetings, small groups, we can have in-person or hybrid like we're having today. There'll be no large group meetings. And someone wrote a comment, how can you even think of opening school if you can't have a large group meeting? We're not going to have any large group meetings if we open school. And finally, visitors, there's going to be limited visitors to the school, and they're going to have to undergo the same precautions as we have outlined for our people who are in school. I'll stop there. Are there questions or comments by the board? All right, next slide, please. Next slide, please. These are factors that I or other decision makers, if we decide to go that, will have to take into account if we are changing levels from green to yellow or orange. One is the spread of COVID in the community, whether we define that by county, local region, statewide. We have to look at New Hampshire. We have to look at local New Hampshire data because northern New Hampshire data, Lakes region data, capital region data, and southern data are all differently. We have to look at school community confirmed positive COVID results in our school community. We'll do infection control. We'll look at that. The third one, the one that keeps me up at night, I have to have the ability to staff our schools safely and supervise students. If we get to the point where we do not have enough teachers and aides available to work, either due to an infection protocol or other reasons, then we cannot hold school because we will not have the ability to supervise students safely. On top of that, there are some critical staff, nurses and administrators who are in leadership. And if we lose too many of them, we're looking at redundant planning. Also for staff, we're looking at redundant planning. But if we lose too many of those people, that will be difficult to run schools because they have to make key decisions in the plan. The availability of PPE. Our plan involves a lot of use of PPE. We have been obtaining as much as we can from the state, although like toilet paper, it may disappear rather quickly, and we may not be able to have access at any price to get it. And that would be a factor that would say we'd have to change levels. And put in compliance with safety protocols, because if students or staff or anybody is not willing or able to comply with the safety protocols that we put in, then we would have to change levels and not have people come to school. If people are going to come to school, they need to abide by the safety protocols that we have established. And the last one is just for me, because inclement weather. Because instead of a snow day, we'll be going to remote instruction day this year. Hey, next slide, please. Here is the school opening timeline that I am recommending to the board today. Tuesday, August 26th, were our previously planned staff preparation days. We can take 3 student days and convert to staff planning to give us a total of 5 days for our staff to come in and plan how to do this absolutely new instructional model, not absolutely new, but this relatively new and different instructional model, and how to implement safety protocols and be trained on them. The next week, September 1 through 3, we've talked at the different buildings about a rolling start, bring students in smaller groups so we can help train them in protocols. We can get to know them as much as we can. Students will not have been in school for a long time. There's going to be a fair amount of social emotional work and just welcome back to school. That'll be determined by each building. We are looking to be full green operational status at the middle school and high school by September 8th. That's the day after Labor Day. And in Bow Elementary School and Dunbar Elementary School by September 10th. And that is our proposed, is to open in green with those opening timelines. All right, that has been my overview of the plan. If the board has any questions for me, I'll answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to bring up Dr. Shannon Bartlett, who is going to talk about our instructional design and delivery. Yeah, why don't you come up here? So, are we coming through okay to the webcam and things look okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Hi, it's nice to meet you, Dunbarton Board. Sorry that I have a mask on my face, but it's nice to be here. I want to start by thanking the administrative team at SAU 67 as the new person here, walking into this scenario and having to try to problem solve and figure out how to put all the pieces together to make, our model really work for kids. It has been an incredible gift to work with this team because everyone works together so well and collaborates and really cares. Kids and learning are at the center of everything they do. So I'm really grateful to everybody that I've just gotten to know through this process and for the support of Dr. Cascadden. when we talk about instructional design and delivery, we recognize right away the lessons from spring of 2020 that some things have to change. Our goal is to provide an educational platform that works and is equitable and high quality for students, whether they're in the classroom, in person, or remotely. And so that gets tricky because as we are thinking about the traditional model that we all know, it doesn't necessarily translate, right? So we're looking at, as Dr. Cascade mentioned, the hybrid model. And for us, it's not about instruction or in scheduling instruction, it is about the delivery and the design of instruction. So the model that we talked about and pulled together throughout this process is really about a simultaneous approach that delivers that equitable instruction to students no matter where they are. We're going to do that in a couple different ways. We're going to set up a system that allows teachers to deliver direct instruction to small groups and employ that workshop model that they use regularly and have used for many years throughout the district. Now, knowing that this kind of model is going to look different in every school, just because the ages of the students and the dynamics and the numbers, I think the goal is really that the transition from remote or in-person learning and back and forth based on sickness or just parents who choose or opt to have their students be at home, that we're going to be really consistent and seamless in any transitions that way. So we're looking at a model that, if you can go to the next slide for me, Roy. So here's kind of a graphic that gives you a better idea about what this model looks like. We're looking at kind of a 3 different rotations that are key elements to this instructional design. Direct instruction from the teacher, workshop model, which again is the opportunity to reinforce learning and reteach learning on the spot based on what students need and whether they are making progress based on your direct instruction, and also an assessment tool that's going to increase accountability for students. It's going to give teachers real-time data on how kids are doing based on what they're learning in direct instruction, and it's also going to lead them to work independently. So if you pull all those things together, we're looking at a centralized management system. So for older grades or grades above second, it's going to be the Google Classroom. Instead of having so many different things happening where students are having to log into different things and just kind of be all over the place, we've centralized that, and that's based on some recommendations coming from the state and best practices for remote learning. Centralize that process so that there's one platform where resources, assignments, projects, software, maybe adaptive learning software, videos, things like that are all in one place for each student. So they log in once and they have access to all of those things. Students in the classroom, and this is really important, are going to be doing the same thing. So the classroom model is going to mimic the remote model in that you're going to have that in-person instruction, and students that are remote will be virtual in the classroom for that direct instruction. And then they will have independent things to do driven through the Google Classroom, or for the younger kids, Seesaw. I think it's that program, what we're going to use. They're going to use that platform to direct their independent work. So the good thing about this is it's going to make sure that kids are accountable for that time without being in front of the screen the whole time. So they know if they have 9 o'clock, they have math class, they are remote, they're in math class virtually at 9 o'clock, individualized or small group instruction for a chunk of time, and then they go and do their independent work. Another key important piece of this is this adaptive learning software. So we have iReady, which is a program that has some adaptive learning components in more than one subject. And so teachers can assign lessons that are connected to their direct instruction, and they can watch the data and see if that instruction is working. But what the key piece is that they're going to be kind of adjusting in real time, their groups, targeting instruction. So it really kind of takes away all of the excess and you're really boiling this down to student learning, moving them forward one step at a time and watching whether or not what you're doing instructionally is working. And then you're adjusting so that you're moving them forward. You're just moving them forward one step at a time, one step at a time. Doesn't matter if they're in front of you or if they're in their living room. You're going to give them the same attention. You're going to give them that face time. They're going to be accountable to you. Their assignments and everything are going to be electronically distributed and turned in, and they're going to get feedback. They're going to get one-to-one feedback with conferencing using the same like Google Meets model or Google Meets software to do that. So when you have this kind of model in place and you have teachers that are operating like this in the classroom, students, whether they're in-house or not, are getting the same experience, and that's really important. So I think kind of pulling all those pieces together is going to be the key to making the transition from one to the other very easy and also simultaneous and synchronous learning. Roy, can you go to the next slide?
I have a question.
Sure.
We have about 15% students who are opting out at this point for next year.
Mhm.
Would you anticipate that the amount of student resources that are dedicated to following and instructing those remote students is 15% or more than that?
I don't.
What proportion of a teacher's time is going to be dedicated to teaching students who aren't in the classroom as compared to students who are in the classroom?
Well, so think of it this way, and again, this is much different, okay? So it's kind of hard to visualize, but if I have 10 kids in the classroom and I group them, I have one group of 4, 3 groups of 3, and then I've got 3 kids remote. And as I'm looking at grouping them to do direct instruction, you know, those 3 remote students maybe fit in different groups. So I'm going to give them, when I am instructing the small group, one small group, the remote student that belongs in that group is going to be right there, right, a part of that. So there's nothing extra there. And then when I am moving from that seminar and when I move to workshop, teachers are going to be like setting up, working with kids in the classroom. How are you doing? Checking in, checking on their learning software, making sure that they're following up and doing that. And also doing, again, like a 5-minute conference with the virtual students of being like, just checking in individually. I saw that you passed that in, but I know you're still struggling with fractions. So let's take a few minutes and talk about that. What can I do to help you? What else do you need? Let me reteach this. Let me use this as an opportunity to reteach because I can tell that you're still struggling with that from what you turned in. And I'm looking at what you worked on in iReady, and I can see that you're still struggling with that. So as a part of the bigger picture, if you have students rotating between these 3 kind of almost like centers or stations, then there's nothing additional. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm more concerned about the elementary school level. And I've talked with a lot of parents who are concerned about this. They're wondering, you know, because it takes more attention to teach a student who's remote at that age, whether or not there's going to be enough attention paid to the students who are actually in class. So.
I definitely can understand that. I think establishing these routines and procedures for the in-person students as well as the remote students, keeping that schedule, being really consistent with the structure in place, and just making this a part of this is the normal way that we do things. Again, it's not about having a kid sit in front of the computer for the day and just kind of be there in the classroom that way. It's that when you are engaging with them, it's direct instruction, it's targeted, it's really specific to those students that you are working with at that moment. So it's not very broad, it's very specific. And so hopefully it's way more engaging because you're saying like the 3 of us, we're working on this one thing right now because I know that's what you need. That's hopefully going to be more engaging and there's higher accountability, right? Because it's a small group, you're not having a whole classroom of kids virtually and you're just trying to manage kind of what are they all doing. So I think it's going to come together. It's just going to take, you know, practice and the routines and the expectations and putting these things in place.
Yeah, I think it would just be very important to make sure that parents understand that if they keep their kids home, that they have an active responsibility to be a part of the educational process.
Absolutely. And this also, there's a component of this that is independent. And that when you have those routines and when you're not in front of the teacher doing virtual instruction, you have things that you need to do that are all, you know, available to you on that learning platform, as well as, you know, 15 minutes or 20 minutes a day per content area, whatever it is, in that adaptive learning software.
Thank you.
Sorry, I feel like this is a dumb question, but is this the setup for whether it's remote or in person or hybrid, meaning like there's a class that's 45 minutes long, the first half is going to be general instruction, and then the next half will be this individualized, either work by yourself or in small groups, or am I completely off the mark?
You're almost there. You're like right there. So what we really don't want to do is like 45 minutes of whole group instruction. like I'm doing right now, just standing up in front, because it's just not very exciting, right? So if you did a 5-minute whole group, all right, everyone, here's what we're gonna do. We have the virtual students there, and we're gonna take 5 minutes just to say, all right, I'm meeting with this group first. You guys get started on your iReady work, and you guys, you have assignments in the Google Classroom waiting for you that you've been working on. So you could do that. I'm gonna take that group, and you guys, I'm gonna meet with you. Come back on to this group, come sign back in or join us again in 15 minutes, and I'm gonna do direct instruction with you. So if you have the classroom set up and you have it laid out, and they see that schedule, they know when their groups work, and this is what they have to do, then again, it's gonna be about establishing those procedures so that 45 minutes is all about 3 different groups of 15-minute direct instruction before you transition to the workshop model where you're checking in individually with kids. You're moving around the room in the classroom, because now those kids are moving from working with you directly to they choose, am I going to do my iReady first, or I'm going to do other assignments that I need to do reinforcing my learning?
So if we were in a red state where everything was remote, the kids would essentially have a whole day of school. I mean,
Yeah.
it would not be that different.
Right, they wouldn't necessarily be in front of a teacher online all day on the screen, which you just don't want anyway, but they certainly would have the structure and the understanding of the schedule and what they need to do to put those pieces in place. And the teacher and the accountability to the teacher, they're going to see that teacher every day. They're going to see that teacher for small group instruction, for whole group, kind of like let's all meet for morning meeting. And they're going to have all those pieces where they are active and engaged in that classroom.
So my question is for the students in the classroom. Does this mean that I have a kindergartner and a second, or a first grader and a second grader? Does that mean they're going to be on the computer all day?
No.
This is just so the children at home can interact,
Right.
see the lesson, but the other students are not doing the iLearning.
No, the other student will also do a rotate, whatever it is, it's age appropriate, the minutes are different, so kindergartners maybe 5 minutes of iReady or whatever platform, whatever product.
Everybody will touch into it, but
Right.
it's not.
So it's almost like a centers, right? So you're gonna do your stuff with the teacher where you're practicing your letters and you're learning, vowel sounds, and then you rotate to the next stage where you have your device and you work for 7 minutes on that. And then when you're done that, you start to do the next center, which may be you're practicing your letters or you're practicing the sounds or whatever, some kind of tactile activity. So everyone will get, and that kind of the iReady platform is adaptive, so when you understand, when the student can demonstrate it independently, it moves them forward, right? So as you're tracking that, you're watching, is what I just worked on with these 3 students, are they getting it? Can they do that independently? Are they practicing it? I'm reinforcing it, but do they need a little help, or are they ready to move forward? And so you're just adjusting like that. So it's far more personalized for kids.
Will any of the live learning be recorded so that people can access it later? And is that a liability or legal issue for us to record anything and then have it up for people to access later?
Well, I don't know about the liability of that, but I can tell you that if you're doing direct instruction with a small group of kids and it's really targeted to their needs, I don't know if you want to record that for anybody to watch, because it's really about those students in front of you.
I just didn't know if there were parents, because we did just got a question about if parents are working, but they still want to do remote learning and they can't have their child in front of the screen at a 9 o'clock math. If that lesson is recorded, can they then access that later when it might be a more convenient time for them?
I'm sure we have the capability if we're recording just the teacher's part of that. But I mean, the goal of that anyway is for the teacher to be interactive with the students who are remote. So you might lose a little bit of that, but I think maybe the opportunity to record that, the teacher's part of that would be helpful.
Do we know along those same lines, do we know any more about, when we had our meeting last week, we were looking at that swivel option, and my understanding was that Google platform has the equivalent of that, and the school was going to look into basically whether we can do that, essentially have the teacher's instruction be recorded at the time. And the second question, I think, was more to Brian. Brian, I think you looked into that privacy stuff before as it relates to public events and stuff. Maybe I'm wrong and I'll put you on the spot, but I thought you had some knowledge on that.
I do not hold me to this.
Yeah.
My memory of it, though, is that you can record as long as you get the fact of, as long as you never put a kid's face on camera. So if we're all sitting here and we have a camera in the back, or even how it's set up right now, and we're the students, if that camera is staying on Shannon, the teacher, then you're okay. Or if it's set up in the back of the room and we're all focused in this direction and like we're looking ahead, that's okay. Now, where it gets tricky is if you're gonna have a mobile kind of classroom, which you may not necessarily have in this model, but if you have known kids who are gonna turn around and talk, like even socially distancing, I mean, I have a conversation with you, I'm turning to face you, like you gotta get yourself off camera for that. So I'm fairly certain that's where the line is at this moment, but I would need to double check, so.
Thank you.
If you look at the presentation, at the slide that's up there now, it really gives a better breakdown of seminar, workshop, and assessment and how they fit together. That just kind of gives some details of the benefits of that direct instruction is data-informed, targeted, personalized, in-person and virtual simultaneously, and that the independent piece includes the iReady or whatever the program is that schools are using. And again, this is going to look different at the different schools based on what the students need. But then also they would have, again, one place where they can access assignments, activities, practice work, even long-term projects, and then kind of that building up that requirement of how many minutes a day per content area they're going to be doing that adaptive software. And then they use the data from that software to do some really great things, to really target instruction, personalize that, inform their groups, how they're going to set up groups, which may change based on progress, student progress. And then drive, targeted interventions too. That's another thing. Instead of doing a separate kind of intervention model where you're pulling kids and going, oh, I think these kids need to work on, that's happening in the classroom in real time with the teachers. And so that's a really powerful thing. It's not an add-on, it's that the teachers are targeting it themselves in that small group rotation. Roy, can you go to the next slide? So again, going back to kind of like redesigning remote instruction 2.0, we talked about what would be really important, and that is to have that organizational structure in place. Redesigning remote instruction. And really the goal is to have one-to-one devices for technology from the start in place, right? So students understand that structure, they have the device, they understand, they have access to everything in a centralized location, so they're not trying to remember how to log into this, how to log into this. The students in person will be learning the same way as those remote. That is that hybrid model, and that the processes and expectations for the hybrid model are established and practiced and reinforced every day. Consolidating everything into one management system will streamline access for parents too. If we want to make sure that they can check and see what their students have done or not, you can even set it up so in Google, if you use a Google Calendar, which Google Classroom will do, it'll email the student when they have due dates for things, and it can also email the parents too. So there's some really cool aspects of that, and now Google, with a revision and update on that, you can do breakout rooms. So you could actually have the whole group and send kids to a breakout room for direct instruction right from the whole group if you wanted to. So increased accountability, daily direct instruction, so FaceTime with the teachers, that accountability is increased. It's part of the regular schedule. So the teacher is still really critical to the success of remote learning. We're not putting off the bulk of the learning on videos that we posted, or here's a bunch of worksheets to do, right? We realize that it really has to be far more engaging, and that the teachers still need to be like a visible part of the kids' day, whether they're in school or at home. And then the last thing, I think this is really important because there's always a concern, there's so much screen time, that this model really is limiting screen time, because you're going to have that targeted instruction, and then the expectation for the adaptive learning software with 5 or 10 minute conferencing, right? Where it's that check-in time where the students getting one-to-one with that teacher, which is going to be really helpful. So with this model in place, or a version of it that allows for these things to happen, I think whether you're in person or at home, you're going to get the same high quality learning experience as a student. And I think that's the most important thing that we're talking about here. Anybody have any other questions?
I got another question, I guess, but more of a comment,
Sure.
is that in the spring session, most of the kids kept their cameras off. And if there's a way to make sure that that doesn't happen, that essentially hold the kids accountable.
Sure.
To no different than if they're in the classroom.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely. Right, and so again, in establishing those expectations and procedures from the very start, that is one of the really important things, right? It's all about having that connectability and seeing the face, the kids' faces and doing that. So thank you, that's a really important point. Any other questions? You can always email me too. I know this is a lot, it's very different, so you can email me any questions or comments or anything like that. All right, thank you.
I do have one comment just from a person listening, and especially board members, if you could just quickly identify yourself when you speak, so people who are listening on the YouTube know who's speaking. It's just hard to see who you are.
Is the camera getting the whole room? Just a little bit?
He's moving it around.
Okay. I was gonna have everybody go around once we were done with the,
Go ahead.
but we can do that now. Move it around.
Go ahead.
Why don't we start with, Owen, why don't you start?
Okay. Owen Harrington, Principal, Dunbarton Elementary School.
Laura Landry, Student Services Coordinator for Dunbarton.
Adam Osborne, Bow Memorial School Principal.
Joe Cotton, Assistant Principal at Bow Memorial School.
Ryan O'Connell, Principal at Bow High School.
Lori Kruger, Principal of Bow Elementary School.
Martin Oswald, Bow School Board member.
Mike Desilets, Athletic Director for both schools.
Bryce Larrabee, Bow School Board.
Jennifer Strongwing, Bow School Board.
Jenna Reardon, Bow School Board. Nicole Sloan, Dunbarton School Board.
Eric Schulman, Bow School Board.
Clement Madden, Dunbarton School Board.
Jeff Moody, Dunbarton School Board.
And Jared Duncan, Dunbarton School Board. And Jeff Trexler is joining us remotely, Dunbarton School Board as well. Okay, Martin.
All right, I'm Marcy Kelly, the Director of Student Services. So just Dean touched on this a little bit in the beginning, that there are some unique circumstances that we have to consider. The first one we talked about, I can't remember what last board meeting, but fairly recently, the governor issued an executive order, number 48. And I only bring this up because it makes the beginning of our year, which is already complex, even more complex. We're required to convene IEP teams on all of our identified students within the first 30 days of the 2021 school year to determine comp ed needs. They have relaxed that a little bit in terms of allowing it to go a little bit further than that, but it's still with over 300 students, that's a lot of things to consider. So we're working on a process for that where parents can choose to opt out of that or waive it if they'd like. But that's knowing that we're going into a year that's a little uncertain, we could have more compensatory ed needs. So just something to consider. PPE, there are going to be students who aren't going to be able to wear masks all day based on their disability. They will be prompted, we will encourage, we will help them with it, but we know that there are going to be students that just aren't going to be able to do it. And for that, those students are going to have people assigned to them, and we will provide additional PPE for those staff working with students. So in the form of whether it's gowns, masks, shields, gloves, we'll make sure that staff are comfortable and safe working with those students. In addition to those staff, we have related service providers who are in close contact with students. So think of speech, PT, OT, we'll be providing the same sorts of PPE for them. It would be really difficult for me to be a speech provider like this. So we have to kind of consider that. And then just IEP teams will make those individual decisions based on that, the context of the school and that student's needs. An example of that would be a student that's having a really hard time adhering to any of the PPE measures, but really needs to be in school. We may need to determine a different location for that student. Roy, can you go to the next slide? So we've talked, especially when you think about elementary and middle school, about space. And so we have related service providers who have different spaces to provide intervention. We have lots of kids out and about going to these places, and we need to limit that. So we're going to have related service providers and interventionists coming into classrooms to the extent possible, and they'll need to free up their spaces. So we need to be flexible with that so that we can have small group instruction happen in other locations, or in the sense of like therapy spaces. Those aren't maybe full classrooms, Lori, right? But they're relatively big spaces. So anyway, we're going to free up those spaces, and then Support staff, we put support staff flexibility here because assignments may change. It's going to change based on our conditions. And you may be assigned as a one-on-one this one day, and then you may be assigned to support a classroom in a different way the next day. And that's going to change depending on where we are in our levels. The dean talked about the yellow and orange status or levels. In those situations, we are going to have kids who need to attend, to continue to come in every day. Those will be individual determinations. And we have a good sense of who those kiddos are, but there are going to be kids who need to be here all the time, as long as we're not completely remote. I put this on here because we do have some, very few, but some immunocompromised students who need to stay home. And obviously there's a cost to this, but we could be in a situation of providing in-home supports to some students. We have had to do that over extended school year. It's been pretty successful. I think we've had a pretty good ESY. It's been nice to figure out some of these pieces around PPD especially. So we have been doing that currently. And then as far as IEP meetings, we're going to do those remote. So all the guidance is telling us to limit visitors, and we're completely capable of doing that remote. So we'll continue to do that remote even in Zoom. That's it for special ed. Do you have any questions about any of that? Right.
Right, I'm standing in for Dwayne Ford, who we got to talk about finances a little bit. On this slide, it says what we have for sources to pay for COVID-related costs. I look at those numbers and say they're really not that big. We do have budgets already established in Bow and Dunbarton, and so we will have to look at transferring money from approved budget lines. We may not buy library books this year. We may not buy musical instruments. We may not buy some things that we originally budgeted for, and instead we'll be buying masks and hand sanitizer and other things. But the biggest thing Dwayne wants us to know, because he always asks the question, how are we going to pay for that? There is no magical pot of money. A lot of ideas come up. We should do this. We should do that. But there is no magical pot of money. We have a budget we have to live within, and we have to move around lines, and we have certain reimbursement from the feds. Next slide, please. We have additional costs. We'll have PPE. We have obtained as much as we could. All summer long, we've put in orders for PPE with the state. And most of it, what we've had so far for summer school is come no cost from the state of New Hampshire. That may dry up rather quickly as people use that. Technology, we need some additional equipment for remote learning, especially at the younger grade levels. So we'll have some additional technology expenses to do that. There's been a lot of questions about our HVAC. We've engaged Turner Building Science, contracted to look at all the building HVAC systems and indoor air quality. They're going to look at those systems, make a report, make recommendations, and try to obtain maximum airflow. We've had indoor air quality studies in the past, especially at Bow Elementary School. Those reports have been distributed publicly and are available still. We'll need additional cleaning supplies and staffing. We are moving custodians from night shift to day shift so that we'll have more staff during the day to clean to clean the building during the day. We have purchased additional custodian equipment, scrubbers and sprayers, and we've increased our part-time custodial staff hours. Dwayne's also responsible for, next slide. He's also responsible for food service transportation. We have two great directors in those. Tiffany is our director for food service. She is, it's going to be very building specific as buildings develop their operational plans about where kids are going to eat to try to keep them cohorted and to keep infection control. She will do whatever she can to have that happen. It does mean that there'll be reduced meal options, and it does mean that it's possibly we're not going to run, we may be running in the deficit in our food service as we make those determinations. We do have a draft transportation plan. There's a link to that on the draft transportation. Mask use by students at all times, sanitizer use. There will be rigid seating charts. You're going to find that that's almost in all of our areas. We'll have rigid seating charts that will help us with contact tracing if we need to. We're going to have parents try to transport their own children as much as possible. Bo owns their own buses and their bus transportation, and we are in contract negotiations, or we're working with a contractor company for Dunbarton, and they've been in contact with that company. Questions on any of Dwayne's things? Yes.
Are we also making sure that we're keeping the air quality during the night hours? And it's not just during when students are in the building, but we should also be making sure that our HVAC system's working and on a schedule at night too.
I can't say yes, but I mean, you could send Dwayne a quick, one of the interesting things is, a lot of the times, things that we have always done, in this time, you have to re-question. I mean, we've always kept buildings locked down tight because it's good safety protocol. But good COVID protocol is to open up and allow airflow. So we have to balance keeping kids safe from that perspective. For example, I told the custodians to leave the air conditioner on tonight. I don't know if we're able to actually stand it in here because we usually turn off all of our air handlers to save money. We may not be able to do that. Maybe that's what the question you're getting.
With the air handlers, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll have to adjust the timing of those, and it may cost us more money because we'll be running more air handling, but that may be part of the report.
And then I have one other question about transportation, and anyone who's dropped their own children off before COVID that has seen what a mess it can be to try to get in and out of any of our buildings. So is there going to be some sort of protocols if parents are all dropping off at the same time and you have 200 kids getting out of their parents' cars and all coming in at the same time, it's kind of counterproductive.
Yep.
So I see that we have a transportation guideline, but will there be a drop-off guideline too for parents to follow so that we?
Yes, and when the individual schools talk about their plans, that's been a huge thing that they've been thinking about. Do we stagger? Do we do this? Do we that? So there's also, it's an issue that they recognize, and they'll speak to it.
Thank you.
Okay.
I got another one, Dean.
Yes.
Bryce Larrabee, Public School Board. Two of our board members are in the medical profession, Eric Schulman, Jenna Reardon, so I'm kind of talking on their behalf from our last meeting. So I don't know how many people are out there in cyberspace, but a point raised at our last meeting was that there's a number of folks in both that are making masks. And, we would call on anyone in the community that wants to make masks to help save the school system money. It'd be great. However, I'm going to defer to Eric. Eric had some kind of specific issues with how best to make an appropriate mask, and if you want to just.
I think maybe you're referring to my comments about the valves of the mask.
Well, yeah, and you said a certain thickness and a bunch of things like that.
Well, I saw recommendations say that 2 or 3 ply, but all cotton masks is very effective. And my main comment was that I was trying to steer people away from any masks that have valves. I think we'll probably have a protocol that says that I'm allowed to suspect, because when you breathe out of a valve mask, you're just exhaling freely, and it's not filtered. So I think having a community, if they're willing to chip in, and there are a lot of good mask makers out there willing to make some cotton 2 or 3 ply masks for the children and donate them, that would be awesome.
But we'll have to get the mask standards out, which, you do as much as you can, but yes, we'll have to have standards. And I have a number of people from this community say, what can we do to help? Can we make masks? Can we build dividers for you? Can you do, can you get us on the sub list? Well, yeah, I got to check. I can't throw out my protocols. I got to check you through. But I think this community is ready to support the schools. We just have to say, how can you best support our schools? And we'll be ready to tap into that. The community has always been ready to tap in, and we're very thankful. How can you best support our schools? Great. At this point, Marcy's going to come up and go over some things for the nurses. The nurses developed some infection protocols for us, and we spent today looking at those protocols and also looking at state guidance. So they've been adapted from what the nurses gave to us. But you'll cover that, right?
I'll cover that, and please chime in. So Dean shared, we met with his school nurses at least a couple of times. They put in a ton of work in helping us develop some guidelines. We also took information from the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics and Dr. Chan from the Department of Public Health. So I'm not going to read through every symptom there. You've seen them 1,000 times by now. But what I would say is that a challenge with this is that these exist in many illnesses, allergies. So teasing that out is definitely going to be a challenge. And if we tease that out, is a challenge.
What's not COVID is what this looks like.
What's that?
That's like everything that you could have.
And they're clear too, that that's not, as things evolve, it's not an exhaustive list. Roy, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to read these just because I think it's important, the wording. We were really careful about the wording. So the entrance in school buildings is not going to be permitted for students and staff who have new or unexplained symptoms, and even mild symptoms must be considered suspicious for COVID-19. The nurse will use his or her discretion to exclude students and staff from the building. We talked earlier about the daily screening. So we're asking parents, students, and staff to screen before coming to school, and they'll do that via Parent Square. Dean talked about the dashboard, making it easy for building level administration to be able to see, and nurses to be able to see who has and who hasn't filled that out. Students and staff will not be allowed entrance to school without a completed screening questionnaire.
Yeah, I think the very hard thing in this, first of all, we're not medical people. But if you look at that list of symptoms and you said, and we look at schools and kids have not been around each other since last March in large numbers and they're going to come together, there are a lot of diseases, common colds, allergies, other things that have these symptoms. If you said if there was a mild symptom of any of these, the child would have to be excluded, then we probably are at a yellow or orange immediately because of just the reality of kids coming to school. I had a meeting with a person the other day. They said to me, look, I'm an allergy sufferer. I've had these symptoms for a long time. They're under control. But I have a runny nose, a cough. I'm on this is me normally. And he said, can I come and talk to you? And I was like, yes, because that is not a new symptom. It's something done. However, those symptoms that he had are on that list of COVID. And so this is an area where you have to say, you know, we want people who are sick to stay home. We absolutely do. We want to change that culture. You can't load your kid up with fever-reducing drugs and say, stay as long as you can. No. And I did that, and I went to school, and I went to work sick. That culture has to change. If you're sick, stay home. And it's a culture thing we have to change. At the same time, if we follow it too strictly, then we're going to have very few people in school at any time. And I don't know the answer to this. I just don't know the answer. And we're going to have to rely on some medical people to help us tease this out a little bit more.
Last one here is that the school nurses will retain the right to rescreen at their discretion. So based on something that they're seeing or something you've been told, they can do that at school.
So one email we just received was, when you ask a question, let's have the speaker repeat it because they can't hear the board members in the back.
Jennifer Strongman, a question. You had mentioned earlier that it's difficult to do a temperature check on every child walking in. So how are we going to ensure that the student and staff have completed the questionnaire before walking in?
So that's something, as we're sitting here, I'm thinking about, and whether that's we have stations outside where we can quickly bring up the dashboard as students arrive and staff arrive, and that's something that we have to consider and still flush out.
Okay, thank you.
It would be really challenging. So the first, we did this every day at ESY just to kind of figure out what it would look
Actually,
like.
Marcia, we had a comment that said, could you talk about ESY and what you did this summer?
Yes.
Etc.
So at ESY, we did do temperature checks.
And it was in person.
It was we did have some remote, but for those in person, we had about 50 students. And the first day, I was down, I met people at the road to tell them where to go. We had 2 separate entrances, one for middle high, one for elementary. And even with splitting those up, it was time consuming to get people in the building, to get their questionnaire that they filled out to say, nope, I haven't traveled outside of the United States or New England. and then to take their temperature. So that definitely held things up. And that was maybe 25 students on either side. So the logistics of doing that with an entire school building would be mammoth. And the guidance is telling us that it's really not an effective strategy with children.
Martin, Marcy, isn't the expectation, the only way this works is we all have to take personal responsibility
That's right.
for our kids and our families, and doesn't that how we have to start it? And if we're all expecting the parents to do the right thing, and after a week of school, there's a million kids here with all these symptoms that's not working, then we gotta take another look at it, or go to a different color, or reassess, but other than the individual families taking personal responsibility, I don't think it's really working.
I agree. And it's like Dean said, it's this culture shift of, we can no longer, as employees, come to school when we're not feeling well. And we have to kind of lean into parents too, to do the same thing with their kids. You can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so newly symptomatic. If while here at school, any newly symptomatic student or staff will be immediately assessed by the nurse to determine if she feels like those symptoms are COVID related. If so, the staff or student will be isolated and then sent home via private transportation. So if it's a staff person and they're safe to drive, they can drive, but if it's a student, they would need to drive. Per New Hampshire DPHS, symptomatic staff and students will be treated as positive results and required to quarantine for at least 10 days. Once these staff or students have improving symptoms and are fever-free for 24 hours without meds, they can re-enter school. The caveat to that is if they have a dated signed negative test or showing that COVID-19 was negative. So that's the only caveat to that. Questions about that?
Can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
Jeff, just a question regarding protocol. There was a period last March, early in March, where Dunbarton Elementary School had 20% of their student population were home with sick with symptoms and so forth that were not COVID. Is there a way that we can compel testing so that we can determine how many of these symptomatic kids actually have COVID, how many just have the common cold or the flu?
I think so.
Can you mute that? There's someone just joined the call that's not muted.
So I think what Jeff was asking, because there have been times, I think you referenced Dunbarton Elementary last year, where there was a ton of kids out because of illness, the flu or just common cold, I'm not sure what it was, and how we can kind of determine that that's not COVID related. Right now, what our guidance says is that the only thing that would do that is a COVID test, a negative.
Which, well, that will be the parent's responsibility.
Right. And so if the parent refuses, and that might be later on, if the parent refuses to go get the test, then they will be out for the 10 days.
And COVID tests right now are taking about 8 days to come back, so.
So you can see as we move into respiratory illness season, how even if we are attempting to operate on a green level, we're going to have a lot of people who need to be excluded from school either voluntarily or to rule out COVID. And so we're really, even if you're in school, you need to be ready to not be in school, either quarantining or self-isolation.
And I would just add from a medical perspective, if they have even the mildest of symptoms, even, like you were saying, it could be allergies, they need to be home. They need to stay home until they don't have those symptoms, for the guidelines, because kids get mild symptoms and you don't know.
And not that this is a question and answer for you, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would you suggest then that after, so the student stays home for 10 days because they suffer allergies, they come back, and as pollen comes back or whatever, that happens again, because now we've known that this is not COVID related, would they then again have to isolate again?
They need to, or be tested. Hopefully the state will be able to ramp up and there will be more of a 48 hour turnaround time. But I think that, yes, every time a child, even if a child has chronic runny nose, the only way to keep the school the safest we can keep it is that if you if you do the screening and you're positive, and again, it's gonna be up to the parents and they have to take responsibility, but if they test positive, you know, or if they screen positive, they need to be home.
Thank you. You can go to the next slide, right? Thanks. Okay, so school-age siblings of students who are asymptomatic and identified as having a high degree of COVID-19 suspicion, and that language comes directly from the New Hampshire Department of Public Health, will also be sent home as a precautionary measure to reduce potential transmission within the school communities. And so as we were teasing this out, Shannon, Dean and I, the way we see that is they have maybe it's a mild symptom, maybe it's multiple symptoms, but we also know that they traveled outside of New England or that they were exposed potentially to someone who was COVID positive. So that's where we would say there's a high degree. And then in addition to that student being sent home or isolated for 10 days, their siblings would have to go as well. Questions about that? Students who've been in close contact with a student or staff suspected positive for COVID-19 will also be sent home and quarantined for at least 10 days or until the conditions for returning to school have been met, as we noted before in Part C. So no symptoms, fever-free, or a negative COVID test. And finally, each of the building principals are developing, well, with the help of their staff, developing seating charts that they can cohort students. School administration and nursing will have those seating charts, and they'll use those. They'll keep them on file to identify school members in close or direct contact with the students or staff suspected of having COVID-19. The school nurse will consult a public health nurse from New Hampshire Department of Public Health, or DHHS, for any guidance needed to report highly suspicious cases of COVID-19, or if there's an asymptomatic student and the parent refuses testing. They'll also provide a list of names for purpose of contact tracing only. And then the Department of Public Health will be reporting building-related COVID-19 cases to the school nurses. So if for some reason a parent doesn't report or produce a test result, they will for us. Questions?
So there's a question that came in right now that says, elaborate on the signed by a physician test result. No physician signs a test result. They come over via the electronic.
So that's something that we'll have to flush out. I don't know.
In our office, when we get the test results back electronically, I write a letter to the employer, or now it's employer, the schools are in session, saying this patient has had a negative COVID-19 test on such date.
Perfect.
Perfect.
That would be perfectly acceptable.
Great answer.
Glad to hear.
Or is there a plan to have some sort of override to these things, you know, like for anomalies or something like that, leave it up to the principal of each school? Or, I mean, there's a sibling doesn't live, they live with separate parents, for example. Never had any interaction, they're different schools. Like, according to that,
Yeah,
I
think that is a good example. If they're not in the same household, and sure, there's some discretion there. And there is discretion for our school nurses. I don't think that the principals can say, oh, no, you can't send that kid home, just on a whim. There has to be circumstances that would permit that. But like Jenna was saying, I think even with the mildest of symptoms, we just need to act on it.
The other thing that's very interesting here is what authority will the school nurse have to make these decisions? And I'm just going to go to a little aside now. I see it in the politics. You have, on the federal level, President Trump says this, Dr. Fauci says this, and sometimes they're not in line. And even on our state level, we have Governor Sununu, Commissioner Annablue saying this. Dr. Chan has been having Friday meetings with the nurses. And superintendents didn't know about these meetings, and we get made aware of them. But I think when Dr. Chan talks to nurses in their meetings, there's a different level of what they're talking about. They're really emphasizing infection control. And I think this is hard for me as an administrator to say, I'm going to have to give up some decision-making power to our nurses. They are the infection control people, but at the same time, I want administrators to be part of some of those decisions. But it's a hard balance, and I don't really have an answer for it. But they have asked some direct questions of Dr. Chan, like if you send a student home with a mild symptom, do you have to send the whole cohort home also? No direct answer has come from that yet. Because think about that, kid comes to school, mild symptoms sent away, we're gonna send home everybody who had any contact with that child. We might as well not try to open it all.
And that was something that was initially in here, and we just felt, I mean, how would we ever get out of yellow in that situation?
Or how would we ever get out of orange?
Right, I mean, we would be sending home classrooms across the buildings.
And not my fear, but my practical thought is when we get later on in the year, deep into cold and flu season, there may be times where we have to go to complete remote instruction because of what we talked about earlier. We have so many kids out ruling out COVID, you don't have the staff to staff it, or we've lost our key decision makers. We're trying to build some redundancy in, but if our nurses are not able to manage our infection control, then we really have a difficult time having school.
One last point of emphasis, we're getting constant questions and comments from the public right now. I'm wondering if we set up an FAQ page after the meeting over the next week to answer some of these questions, because I can tell from some of them that we probably have not fleshed out the answers yet, but I don't want people sitting at home thinking we're ignoring you right now. But I'll address the public comments we've received in writing once the administrative reports are done at the end. And then I think what we'll do is probably set up an FAQ page. Dr. C, does that sound okay?
Yes, that sounds wonderful.
Otherwise, we'll just be answering these all night, I think, and I don't know that we have answers to all of them.
And the other thing for me in doing this, there's so many of these questions that have to be answered by the people who work directly in here. And so,
Right.
yes, we'll set up FAQs at the building levels too.
Do you want to do this, or do you want me to do it on here?
Sure, you can do that.
So we're about to head into building-specific plans, but we didn't want it to have you read this 4 times. So standards of practice that'll be in place across the board, that daily screening process that we talked about for students and staff, mandatory cloth mask wearing, again, with limited exceptions that we talked about, required social physical distancing. We are aiming for, in green, we're aiming for 6, but 3 to 6 it could be, and then once we get to yellow, it would be 6. Frequent hand washing and sanitizing. As I said, groups are going to be cohorted. You'll hear what that looks like in the different buildings. We will have seating charts available, and those seating charts in our ideal world, and it doesn't necessarily work for every building, I'm thinking of the high school, but they will be in the same location wherever they are. Reduced transitions, coordinated bathroom visits, recess breaks with physical distance protocols, increased facility cleaning procedures, and we just went over the COVID response and infection control protocols. I think. Brian? You?
Liz?
Brian always goes first.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the high school. I'm Brian O'Connell, principal here at Bow High School. As we were kind of developing our plan, we had 2 goals, obviously, in mind as we were doing it. And the first is safety for everyone in our school community, students, staff, parents who are interacting with us on a regular basis, interacting with your students at home, and making sure that we can do this in as safe method as possible. And the second is to continue to deliver the high quality and personalized educational experience that we can for our kids. So that's what we were trying to achieve with our plan here as we're looking to reopen. So we can go to the next slide, which is going to give an overview of our bell schedule. I'm a high school guy, so I always have to think of things in terms of a bell schedule. It's just how I focus and look at things. And we're trying to stay consistent, but be reflective of the needs of our current situation. So we're going to adjust our bell schedule a little bit and have this kind of template in place no matter what the level is that we're operating in. One of the things I just want to be kind of upfront with is that we have limitations in our ability to create student cohort groups at the high school. We can do some of it throughout the day, but with our elective model and the kids taking different courses, including going over to CRTC in Concord and interacting with students from Concord High and other schools, we are limited in those cohort groups that we can do. That doesn't mean that there are steps that we're not taking to try and make sure our kids are in a more safe environment. One of those things that we're going to do is we're going to stagger the start of our courses each period. We're going to split our classes into 3 groups, Group A, Group B, Group C. I'm just going to first mention the beginning of the day, and then it kind of waterfalls there through the rest of the day. Group A classes would start at 7:30, Group B classes would start at 7:45, and the Group C classes would start at 8. That allows the kids to come into the building at a staggered time, arrive a little bit differently, lessens the numbers of that sudden rush of kids coming in. Those groups are roughly structured as freshmen in Group A, sophomores in Group B, and then juniors and seniors in Group C. Our teaming models for the freshmen and sophomores does allow us some cohorting of groups in particular classes together. And our juniors and seniors are mainly in an elective model. We're doing a lot of choice in the classes that they're taking. So we do have that kind of cohort group. That doesn't mean that all of our electives are juniors and senior courses. For example, music has kids from all 4 grades in it. And the law and ethics class might have kids in 3 different grades in it. So that there is crossing over there of the different grades we have here at the high school. We will continue trying to do our odd even schedule that we would normally do, the block schedule that we would normally do. 1, 3, 5, 7 on the odd day, 2, 4, 6, 8 on the even day. And then for our lunch period, we would keep the kids in a group and kind of move them as a big group through the building. So you would leave, say, your period 3 class, you would move down to the cafeteria, you would pick up your lunch, and then you would shift to a different location to eat that lunch. We are trying to do some bigger locations for when we have to be in the building. We'd be looking at the gym for one of the groups, auditorium for one of the groups, CAF for one of those groups. They're kind of cohorted in the class that they would be coming from already. We'd be spreading them out. Those are big areas, the 3 biggest areas in our building for us to spread the kids out and keep them socially distanced. We have the luxury of putting our kids outside as much as humanly possible. So if the weather's nice and green, we'd be eating lunch outside, encouraging outside activities for classes and such, because it's obviously easier to social distance when we're outside. So that staggered thing is the big part of our day. If you can go to the next slide. One more note about that kind of staggered schedule that does keep in mind, because I saw some questions about this, keep CRTC aligned with those times right there. If you're not aware, can I say this out loud? CRTC?
Yes.
Okay. They're going to be open 5 days a week for their students, kind of keeping their normal schedule. They have to align their schedule with, I believe it's 9 different high schools, so good luck to them. But they're going to have their normal schedule as it is. So we have kids in the Block A and the Block B typically over there. So we've tried to align our times, particularly that Group C class, which is where the juniors and seniors are, to align with those CRTC times. Our students in CRTC will be allowed to drive themselves to and from CRTC as long as parent permission is given. And they can go there directly from home, especially within that first block. They can go directly from home to Concord and then arrive at the school. This is nice because that's a large group of students for us and it takes them out of the building. As you heard me talk about with courses, one of our goals is to just limit kids in the building at various times when it makes sense. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. We may not be able to cohort as strongly as other schools, but we do have the luxury with older students to get them out of the building on a more frequent basis. When we talk about levels, in a green level and a yellow level, we would keep those staggered times. If we were to shift to that orange or red, where we're primarily in just remote instruction, we would just transition to the C time so everyone would have consistent time at that point. The staggered time is to limit, hall passing, kids interacting, those type of methods. If we're all out of the building, might as well have the same consistent time. We'll go into that C level time right there. Being at yellow in the high school is going to be the most challenging for us because of those cohort groups. If, God forbid, we were to have a case, it might be we shift right to orange, from green to orange, because of the way the nature of the cohort groups of the different kids are interacting. If we have a kid who happens to be in classes with 4 different grade levels because of the nature of their schedule, maybe they also go to CRTC in that mix, it might be a quicker shift for us to get to that orange and that full remote kind of schedule where it's different from the other buildings. So the last big thing that we're going to need help for is we want, this sounds kind of odd for a principal to say, we don't want kids in the building. I say that half jokingly, but what I mean by that is we have free time in our kids' schedules. And we would strongly encourage kids, if they don't have a reason to be in the building, they're not scheduled for a class, to not be here, to go home during their free time. Most of our juniors and seniors readily take us up on this offer. They do it typically, normally. We've in the past just allowed seniors to full day open campus. We're going to open up though that to any student who wants to have access to that. So obviously if a student can self-transport themselves, that's an easy thing for them to come and go. We realize the challenges that's going to have for students who can't self-transport themselves, either they're riding the bus or they're having a parent pick them up or drop them off. If a student remains in a building during a free time, we will designate and assign them a specific location during their free time. For example, the library is going to look way different at the high school. You know, we're going to use that as a space. It's a big space. We can assign students in there to do work. We can keep track of where they are in that kind of setting. And that is a place that we're going to put kids when they're kind of on that free time. So we're going to encourage kids who don't have I don't mean to be crass when I say this, but don't have a purpose or direct reason to be in school at that time to please go home and leave the building at that time. Same thing, we're going to talk about online courses in a few moments. We would encourage kids who are in online courses who can do that work at home to do that work at home so they can go home and be out of the building. Along with the staggered start times, we're going to have one-way traffic in our hallways. For those in front of you, you may notice the pink signs up on the walls that are directing you the one-way flow traffic to the hallways. We're hoping that helps with the passing time to kind of limit and keep that social distancing as much as possible. We're going to need a lot of help from our students to pull this off. We have a great student body. This upcoming senior class is a great group of kids. I really expect them to be a great set of leaders for everybody here. And we're going to need the students to kind of work with us, you know, and help us in the hallways maintain that distance. If they feel like they're coming up on someone, maybe slow down and allow that space to kind of unfold. Remind each other to keep their masks on. Just be conscious of those things. So we're going to have to all kind of work together to kind of make this happen here in the high school. The one other part about the schedule I want to touch base on is the Wednesday. So we have, if you're familiar with it, in our schedule, typically, which would be a blue type of model, next slide please, is we have something we call a skinny day on Mondays, where all 8 classes would meet. That's just not a good idea in this type of model. When we talk about trying to stagger start times, limit kids in the building, allow them to come and go. Time is our friend, and there's not a lot of time in that skinny day. So we're going to get rid of the skinny day, and at the same time, in our normal schedule, we've gotten rid of the flex time, which is actually a huge asset for our students. So we want to be able to kind of build some of that flex time still in for our students. It's a lot of open-endedness when it's on a regular school day, in a typical schedule, and we need to create some more structure for that. And we definitely still have a need for that. Kids might need additional time to work, you know, with the teacher, especially around AP courses. A lot of the teachers do the supplemental instruction during that kind of flex time. You know, it's a great time to kind of make up work when you need to do those things. So we're transitioning all that into a singular day, which is going to be our Wednesday. We'll have faculty available for 2 of the blocks. And kids don't necessarily have to go to their teacher for a particular flex time, and that's true on a normal day. They would be signing up, they would be going in, and to meet with teachers to get support or additional instruction. We're also going to really use that time to kind of help us do some bigger things, I guess is the best way to describe it. I'm going to use a science lab, for example. We can set a science lab up and have it be available for kids over, you know, the entire school day period. They're 7 to 8 hours. And it will help us keep that lab clean and up to space and assign those kids over the course of an entire day in smaller groups and keep everything in a more safe environment. So there might be times in that where kids are assigned to come in. I would expect this not just sometimes. There will be times kids will be assigned to come in to do those type of bigger assignments. When we look at how the weather is going to be nicer here in the fall, we might front load some things that we can do outside, whether it's active days in best class, whether it's, again, like a science lab, whether it's music instruction, so our music teachers can work with smaller groups in a larger capacity, whether it be outside and in those kind of settings. We're going to try and front load some of those things while the weather is agreeing with us here. We can kind of utilize our outside space.
Hey, Brian, have you looked into any large community tents? I know we talked about in Dunbarton for tenting options outside. That was a lot of the comments we received too.
Yeah, Dwayne's been looking at it. I mean, one of the concerns with coming in is the putting it up and putting it down and who's going to do that, you know, and what's the amount of time you can keep something up and so it doesn't get damaged or anything like that. So, I mean, we're having those discussions. I mean, we have some smaller kind of tents.
Oh, I'll think of the big one.
No, I know. Like the big canopy.
Cover the football field.
Yeah. And it's just a matter of how can you do that in a safe environment. I mean, a windy day could destroy that, or a bad weather day or something like that. But it is something we're discussing and looking at, because we want to get outside. The outside, the nice weather, especially here in the fall, is going to be our friend and kind of through this experience, whether it's during lunch periods, during class instructions, time, just PE class, getting outside and doing it in that type of environment, not the gym. It's going to be very helpful for us.
Jennifer Strong, Go School Board. So am I hearing, or did I interpreting this correctly, that on Wednesdays, if kids have not signed up for something, they don't have to come to school?
I wouldn't go that far. We are going to get them signed up as much as possible, just like we do on a normal flex day. And the older the kid, the more flexibility we allow in that kid. I mean, we learn kids over the course of 4 years. If we have a senior who's all caught up, it's mid-October, they're all caught up in their work, they got straight A's, they're not going to sign up for anything that day, we may not be chasing down that kid to get them done and taken care of. If we have a freshman and it's the first week in September, we may go the extra step and sign all those kids up in that class kind of across the board. We do want to kind of do that personalized approach still for kids during that time. Normally during school day, it's 40 minutes, an hour there on Thursday and Friday. And this, we're kind of condensing it all to one day. But just like in that model, there's going to be times where we do the signups for the kids and have them come in and really kind of work with it, especially when we're talking those younger kids or who may be struggling in certain classes and stuff like that.
So they may come in though for just that lab.
They may, but again, I think when we see it kind of spilled out, again, with the freshmen, we're going to try and get them here. They're going to be here anyway, more likely be here because of the transportation fees. So you have to use that to our advantage and kind of put them all over the place and sign them and put them in different classes. But as we get to those older kids, we do trust them to kind of make those choices more on their own. So.
Thank you.
Yep. I think we're on the next slide. All right, so I'm going to kind of give a quick overview. This is more course models. I'm going to stay a little away from instruction, but I'll touch on it kind of through this. You're going to hear us talk about online courses, and it's going to be courses that we are going to declare as online courses that will just be taught in kind of a remote environment. They will still be taught during the schedule. So if a student has an online class, let's say they have Money Matters online, and it's scheduled for period 2. They're still going to meet for that class during period 2. It will just be completely online. Now, there are some courses, again, the advantage for us having the older kids, while it's harder for us to cohort, we can also do more of this kind of flexible instructional model in the sense that we can take entire courses and put them online. For example, that Money Matters course, we already have curriculum in place and have taught for years Money Matters in an online environment. It's no change for us to make all of our sections of Money Matters into an online course. So I can see us take all of our, for example, business classes, which are easy to translate into that type of model, and moving them all into online courses of those things. Our dual enrollment courses that we have partnered with SNU. SNU is doing all their courses this fall in an online environment. They have no kids live on campus. It's easy for us to make all of our dual enrollment classes that align with the SNU curriculum and instructional model into online courses. The advantage this gives us is we're now limiting kids in the building because those kids can stay at home to do that course. They don't have to physically be in the building. Of course, if we have a kid in the building, we will find a spot for them and assign them a location to be participating in that online instruction. It's not that we can't have the kid in the building. This is just a way that kids are able to stay home and still engage in their education, thus lessening the numbers we have here at the school. In the same breath, as we see kind of things unfold here over the next few weeks, I'm anticipating us creating remote sections of courses. If we're running 8 sections of 10th grade science, and we have 20 kids who are going to be remote only, that's enough for a remote section. We could do 7 live sections, or in-person sections, and then a remote section of that course. So I can see us adjusting student and or teacher schedules as we get kind of that information in from specific kids, families, and stuff. We're going to have our courses kind of do that hybrid approach that Shannon was talking about. High school teachers do that kind of already. I think about my own practice when teaching math. I'll start a course, I'll do a class period. I might do a top math, do a couple problems on the board, a couple of examples. Then I might say, hey, do these 5 practice problems. If you're remotely, I've posted it on Google Classroom. You're here live in the classroom. I have a piece of paper for you, or I put it up on the board for you to see. I'm walking around to this small group, working with that group, as you guys are working over here. I work over to my remote class. Hey guys, how you doing? You doing good? Got questions on? All right, let's bring the whole class back together. Let's assess what we just practiced with that and move on. I haven't changed my instruction at all, but I've touched on all those different people as I've kind of gone through the practice and stuff. That's what we're talking about with that hybrid theory. just engaging with everyone who's kind of there. Not necessarily changing our entire way of operating, but embracing kind of the different ways that we can do things for everybody. Likewise with courses, we have VLAX. I mean, it's available K through 12 now, but high school kids are most frequently using it. We have plenty of kids already on VLAX classes in addition to whatever they're taking at FO. We'll continue to help kids out with that. We have a new online program called Edgenuity that we piloted last year. You may remember me talking at a board meeting randomly once upon a time, but we're going to expand that a little bit, which allows us to deliver more online instruction too if kids are interested in taking courses in that kind of manner. I think that might be everything that I have for the high school. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Yes.
Jennifer Strongly, both school board. So I just have one quick question about the staggered start. And if we have, like thinking of Bryce's family, who has a senior and an incoming sophomore, and if the sophomore has to be at a certain time, but the senior's driving on, are you now going to have a group of kids in the parking lot waiting for their time to come in? And is that, again, counterproductive to what we're trying to do?
It's a very real possibility. I mean, if you've ever been here at the high school, even as early as 6:45, we have had typically a group of students who are hanging out in the parking lot and kind of just waiting for school to start. Not doing anything wrong, not doing anything bad. They're just being social and hanging out with their friends before school starts. So that is definitely a real possibility. We're going to have to, supervision, obviously, for all of us is going to change. We're going to have to be just out and about even more frequently than what we are to help with those type of matters. And again, this is where we get to kind of working with kids to kind of help us kind of make this kind of thing work. In that situation, I might say, hey, can you go pick me up a coffee, Cooper, and come back with it at like black ice, and then be good. To keep them off campus and those type of things. But having those kind of conversations with people, what does that mean? And there's difference kind of waiting in the parking lot. If a kid's waiting in their car, listening to some music or playing with their phone for 10, 15 minutes, just kind of quietly there with windows rolled up or something like that, that's great. But you're right, if kids are going to get out and start kind of hanging out and conjugating in the parking lot, that becomes an issue for us that we kind of have to address and kind of remind them to kind of move a little bit.
I'm Bryce Larrabee, Low School Board. Not that it's all about me, but no, use that example. It's actually the opposite because in this circumstance, my daughter who is not old enough to drive, would need to be there before the senior who is old enough to drive.
Yeah.
Which means it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But again, like, it's so minor. I'll figure out how to get my kids to school.
I mean, this is kind of the reality with the staggered start.
Yeah.
We make a trade-off one way or the other. We're going to gain some advantage of not as many kids here, but we're going to create some more complicated transportation situations. I mean, we are aware that parents have made it a routine to drop their kids off by 7:30 at the high school. And if that kid doesn't have a class till 8 o'clock, how has that changed that morning routine for that family? We're not unaware that we're changing routines here. But I think the advantages of throughout the day, I've always approached this from a safety thing. How are we going to tackle passing time? That is where we're most vulnerable. I mean, when we're in a normal operating way, when you factor in staff and students and everyone in the building, we have 800 people in this building at any given moment, during a passing time. How do we limit, and get that down as much as humanly possible to minimize how many people we have just in the hallways? So this is kind of the trade-off we've come up to. That's what we started initially. We've never seen this in action. I might be back to you guys in September and say, hey, that's staggered start. This is the problems that came up with it. We got to adjust, But I think that's what we're going to try, at least to attempt to kind of minimize who we have in the building at any given moment. So.
Mr. Duncan, may I suggest that we recess till 8 o'clock to allow people to go to the bathroom? Just take a break, because I don't know about you, my intention is feeding first.
Absolutely. Let's come back online at 8 o'clock together here. So 13 minutes on my watch. Everyone at home, take a break.
thank you for kind of letting us present the building plans. It's been a really good exercise, I think, for all the schools to go through it. I think you'll see as I begin to run through the PMS slide, you're going to see how the different schools kind of play to our inherent strengths. And we all have certain advantages and strengths when it comes to trying to address the spread of infection in our buildings. And some of Brian's challenges are actually the middle school's strengths. Like middle school, kids do not have free periods, so we treat that like a strength, like they are structured. Middle schools are nothing if they're not structured. So I think you're going to see that. We've had to make massive changes on a certain level to our schedule. Like as we unfold this presentation a little bit, you're going to see that the schedule looks radically different in terms of how we're cohorting kids. I mean, always one of the highlights for kids as they go to a middle school is you now, for the first time, are not self-contained. That's a highlight. It really is historically a highlight. Fourth graders love to come up and not be self-contained all day long. They like to move. They like to switch classes. It's part of the fun and the developmental milestone of coming to middle school. And part of that is going to be tabled this year. And it really needs to be tabled because we have to cohort kids. And what I'm going to try to do in the next few minutes is explain what I perceived as the middle school's inherent challenges and how we kind of have looked to mitigate them or address them. The biggest challenge I would say the middle school has is essentially transition times and transition periods. Middle school kids are wonderfully social. They just are. They're awesome. They love being around each other. They chat, they get close to each other, they hug each other, and all that is totally developmentally normal. It's also a COVID nightmare, you know? So we have to really be structured, organized, and systemic in our response to that. So I'm going to start talking about some blocks we've developed in our day. Historically, the middle school has not run blocks. That's more of a high school thing. But you're going to see by my third slide, essentially, not including the introductory slide, that the schedule looks, in some ways, kind of like a block schedule. We're going to alternate days. We're going to have fewer classes in a day. And it's all about having cohorts that are together longer, and they're not in the hallways as much. We completely recognize we're going to have to do mask breaks and movement breaks. You can't expect a fifth grader to sit in a double period and not move. Like, you just can't do that. They're 10. They are wired to move. So we get it. It's going to be built in. But in terms of as a whole class approach, that's one of those compromises we're going to make. We're going to block in longer segments. And it's really going to be about cohorting and containing transmission of any possible infection. Could I get the first slide up? Thank you. So the fundamental approach we're going to use, Brian is playing to his strengths in the high school, which includes freedom in the older kids, and they're flexible. They can kind of come and go a little bit more. They have a little more autonomy and independence. Our kids don't, but we have a different advantage that we can use to try to help contain any infection from spreading within our building. We can cohort very effectively, but it is different, radically different than what middle school has been over time. You know, that switching classes kind of thing. What we are striving to do this year is have kids into school. They will be in a cohort to begin their day, and our hope is that they go through that day. And it's not just a hope, it's our plan. I mean, this is what's going to happen, providing you approve it, of course. And they will go from the first block, same group of 18 to 22, somewhere in that. It's probably, honestly, it'll be 18 to 20, minus the 15% that may be remote. They'll go to their second class of the day, same cohort. We've extended this logic even to specials. That will create a cascading challenge/opportunity in our schedule, which I'll explain a little bit more. The cohorting will massively help with contact tracing should we need to do that. I met with all the teams in our school actually today to explain some of these concepts and roll them out to them so they wouldn't be surprised as they watch tonight. What I was suggesting it might look like. And I definitely explained to folks, we are looking at set seating plans that would go from first class to the second class. So if Johnny is sitting next to Susie in class 1, Johnny will be sitting next to Susie in class 2. And I know that limits some of that natural innate fun and freedom that has always been a part of middle school, but it's also part of that compromise that later on, if we get a COVID positive results, we have more effectively contained it. So that's the thought process behind it. Mandatory seating charts, the contact tracing, the cohorting. I want to talk a little bit about specials for a minute. Many of you have had kids go through the middle school and you're familiar with our specials rotation. Our specials rotation is comprised of 8 specials. Here's that challenge opportunity I was talking about a little bit ago. We fully anticipate kids are going to come back to school this year with additional social, emotional needs. For a lot of kids, remote learning did not necessarily go super well. They either miss school tremendously and they're excited to be back, or they miss school and they're really, really nervous, or anxiety's through the roof. We really believe we're going to need more support from our guidance counselors. So the natural first place we looked to reduce the number of specials in our rotation were the guidance counselors. Each of our guidance counselors have historically taught 2 specials classes. This is going to enable us to have our guidance counselors available much more of the time. They're not going to be teaching these classes specifically. They'll be pushed into classes later on because the needs and the things they were teaching are not unimportant. For instance, in 8th grade, they teach transitions, which is all about preparing kids for high school. That doesn't go away. In some ways, it's going to be more timely, though, because I see Kate, our 7th and 8th grade guidance counselor, teaching that in May, right when you're on the doorstep of going to high school, or January when we're preparing for high school schedules. So it can be some really timely pieces of her content. And in 5th grade, Joe teaches conflict resolution. Well, if you're in the same cohort of 10-year-olds all day, the need for conflict resolution didn't just go away. There's probably more, but we'll be able to push Joe in different ways. And we've reduced one of our specials. And we're going to also look to merge PE and health, because the key in 5th grade is we need 6 specials. If the cohorts are going to go through the day, we have to match the number of cohorts to the number of specials. And PE and health has always overlapped for us a lot. It just has. Those 2 teachers have taught together. Health has gone to PE multiple days, and the remaining specials have gotten longer. So that's one of the strategies we are going to employ. In 7th and 8th grade, they're bigger grades. We only need to eliminate the guidance special from the rotation. And again, Kate is going to push into 7th and 8th grade classes as it's appropriate, but she may be pushing into an LA class. She may be pushing into a social studies class to do whatever the timely topics are. Having said that, and sticking with 7th and 8th grade for a minute, transitions are one of our biggest areas of concern, particularly in 7th and 8th grade. And the reason is in 7th and 8th grade, we have more kids than any other grade, and they're bigger, but they're still in the same size hallways, which are fairly narrow in our building. They're not as wide as they are here. So they just can't spread out as much. We're going to have to be almost like a train station managing transitions, just because if you've ever been to middle school during a 7th and 8th grade class change, it's not a bad thing. It's an awesome thing. They're being completely developmentally appropriate, and they're great kids, but they're all over each other. I mean, it's wall-to-wall kid in that 8th grade hallway, which again, developmentally appropriate, and they're not doing anything wrong, but a COVID scenario nightmare. So we're going to have to be very structured as how we change classes. Just touching on the other big concern points for Doug and I as administrators, cafeteria. We're still going to try to use the cafeteria some, but it's going to be greatly, greatly reduced. The majority of kids are going to eat in their classroom. And we think, because our cafeteria is large, we might be able to get up to 2 classrooms at a time into the cafeteria in a socially distanced manner. We definitely cannot put 144 8th graders in that cafeteria at one time. We can't do it. We just created a mass gathering. Could we do 40? Yeah, we probably could. We have a lot of tables. We have a lot of space. We're lucky. That's one of our bigger areas. And then recess protocols. We are going to have to create some additional recess protocols. What kids can use and can't use, like throwing a ball back and forth with a kid from my cohort. You know, if Bryce and I are in the same homeroom and we travel together all day, for us to play football, you know, throwing it back and forth, we'd probably do that. But when we start blending cohorts and all of a sudden we're playing a big game of something, we have to think about that. We don't want to take all the joy out of recess, but at the same time, we want to manage that risk in a way that makes sense. So we're going to think a lot about our recess protocols. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So the overview by grade, I've hinted at a few things. This will just give you a quick snapshot. In 5th grade, with the model change we were moving to, it made it so darn easy to do this. We already had the kids down to two core area teachers traveling by cohort, and the way that hallway laid out, it was easy peasy to do what we're proposing. Implementation will have challenges, obviously, but to do this, they were structurally set up for it. 6th grade, also very convenient to do it because in 6th grade, they have 4 core classes. When we go to the next slide, you'll see that I'm going to propose double blocking those 4 core classes so they would alternate days. So whatever class you would traditionally have had period 1, we'll think of it as your block A. And you would have that for 2 class blocks on a Monday, but you would not have it on a Tuesday. By doing this, what we're going to do is create some really long classes that will have movement breaks and everything else, but a teacher will only see 2 cohorts of students in a day. And the kids are going to have their travel in the hallways really minimized, which will be helpful. In addition, we're going to create a much easier scenario for custodians to do any during the day cleaning. So that type of a thing, those are the types of protocols and changes we're looking to make. Hopefully that'll be a helpful thing, and I think it's going to actually enable the instruction that Shannon was describing to work better. Because when you're talking about these small groups in this hybrid model, you are talking about a need to go between multiple groups, and that takes time. Well, now you've just created a 2-hour chunk of time. That allows for a lot of small group work and differentiation, even though it is not every day. But kids will definitely have a lot of time for individual attention, and the teacher will be able to focus on them very well. In 7th and 8th grade, this took a lot of thought, and Doug and I really spent a fair amount of time going over different models of a block schedule, and it was not easy to do. And eventually what cracked the case for us was moving the study hall, and parents who've had 8th graders and 7th graders before will recognize that. It's been kind of a time-tested tradition that 7th and 8th grade have study hall at the end of the day. But by moving it, we were able to create 2 large 90-minute chunks of time. In 7th and 8th graders, we'll go from having what I was really concerned about in terms of a schedule, because it had 5 core classes plus a special. It was almost movement, like every 45 minutes, all day long, those hallways would have been full. But we've really quieted the building. We've minimized transitions, and they will have an alternating block for 4 of their core classes. So they'll have 1 skinny period that will be every day, and they will have 2 blocks which would alternate like an A day and a B day. And that will all come clear on the next slide. And the last bullet on this slide happened to be about increased counselor time. I do think that's a big thing, and I don't want to underestimate that. That is really and truly going to be very, very important. If we go to the next slide. On the next slide, this is a draft of the schedule. And those who are familiar with our schedule, you'll recognize pretty quickly, this is a much simpler schedule than we've historically had. If you looked at a 7th and 8th grade schedule, typically, kids literally moved every 45 minutes to an hour. There were a lot of transitions in that day. Now, if you look at a 7th and 8th grade schedule, the 7th and 8th graders are each going to have 1 class that meets every single day. And other than that, they're going to have some blocks. The minutes aren't exactly equal in that skinny class for 7th grade, for instance, is smack up against the beginning of the day, and it looks like it's an hour long. And it is technically, but remember, that's homeroom, where attendance is being taken, a lot of things are going on, so it's actually going to be a little bit shorter than the 60. And then the 8th grade skinnies at the end of the day, where we're shutting school down. So even though it's 60 on paper, it's going to be closer in balance to the blocks than it may look there. In the 5th grade and the 6th grade columns, you'll see they have those double blocks of classes. The one thing I'd point out to you in the 6th grade is it's a block, a break, a block. Same cohort of kids, Remember, they're all traveling together to that special. So even though they're moving kind of together, and the sixth grade is smaller. We're better able to manage transitions with sixth graders. There's fewer of them. I hope that gives a pretty good overview of kind of what we're thinking and the strategy we're trying to employ. We're working through some details still. It's tough to build a schedule as kind of quickly as we have and have every kink worked out of the, machine essentially. For instance, we've got band worked out as a possibility that could exist, should we be able to do it in a COVID-safe manner for every single grade except 8th. Well, we obviously have to work it out for 8th. We have to figure out how to do it. But I offer that up as an example of we're still working on details. We don't have absolutely everything solved. So that's the draft of the schedule. That's the draft of the overarching philosophy. I do want to take 1 minute and just kind of thank the Bow PTO and give them a shout out. The Bow PTO, I had talked to Bianca about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and we had been talking about getting masks for the school. That would say like BMS. And she offered to do that for each of the other schools. So to open the year for the Bow schools, they're gonna do that. And I know Owen's kind of exploring that for Dunbarton as well and how that might work there. But we thought opening in this manner is not just about a schedule. It's not just about cohorting. It's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be about a theme. It's got to be about a package and how we put this together. I don't know the exact wording of the theme for Bow Memorial yet this year, but we do a school theme every year. We're doing one again. It's going to be something about forward together or stronger together, or has got to become part of the overarching message for the year. And I'm appreciative of the PTO for doing what they're doing because that fits with that message. I'm sure I've forgotten something. If I have, please feel free to email either Doug or myself. We're happy to answer questions. And I'd also like to recognize and thanks Doug for all the work he's kind of done on this for the last few days. He's really been an awesome teammate. Yeah.
Bryce Larrabee, Bow School Board. The big question that comes to mind for me at your school is basically language. It's the Spanish and the Chinese, and to me that's your big challenge, and you know how to do it. That to me is the only real major challenge.
You're asking the right question. Like that, we thought about that a lot. So in 7th and 8th grade, what I didn't get into in the details is we absolutely had to build the cohorts around the language. Had to do it because you start any big scheduling process with your constraints is what we always kind of call it in school. Start with your constraints. Your constraints in the middle school are your world language. So we anticipate building the cohorts in 7th and 8th grade primarily around language. We feel confident in 7th grade we can really cohort almost every single student. So with language I would put reading. Because that's your elective, that's your choice class, so you kind of have to be grouped that way. 8th grade is even a little bit more complicated because you layer on algebra as well. So in 8th grade, I would say we're going to cohort as well as we can with that known constraint, and we'll probably be able to get to somewhere in that like 90% cohorted, 95% cohorted in 8th grade. 7th grade, I really feel like it may not be 100, but it's going to be pretty darn close.
Will you have a tiny Chinese cohort?
No, we'll have to group Chinese with a reading cohort, and for that class, it will split apart. Yeah, so we're gonna have to do a little, it may not be perfect, and right now it's still a little anticipatory. We waited this year purposely not to load our IC schedule because we just didn't know what the guidance was gonna be. We didn't know what we didn't know. So the next 2 weeks is really about loading IC. And I have a better answer for you once we're able to load Infinite Campus with all the kids' schedules. But I really do think we'll be in 5th and 6th grade, 100% cohorted. 7th grade, I feel good about our ability to cohort. 8th grade, we're aiming for like 90%. If we get to 90%, that's pretty good.
My last question is, so if you go to Bow Memorial School at 8:02, it's a zoo. I mean, there's 500, maybe more kids in the cafeteria, and then you have all sorts of, and it's great. I mean, you get a million extracurriculars and clubs and all that sort of
It
stuff.
is great.
Have you thought through how you're gonna deal with all that?
Yeah, that actually makes me a little bit sad because that's a piece of the culture we're gonna have to curtail. So, and that was one piece I forgot to mention as I was going through. Here's how we're planning on handling it. We really can't do a staggered start because our classes, we kind of kick off at the same time. Our version of the staggered start, I would call it almost a rolling start. Kids can come anytime after 8:15 and they'll be directed into their homerooms. So that other part of the BMS culture that I really liked over time, sincerely, it's a great, rich part of the culture. And we'll get it back, it'll just be post-COVID, is the cafeteria before school. Like, we have so many kids in there, they love coming, they want to be there, they sit with their buddies, and it's a good, joyous time. We can't do that right now. So we're gonna really have to work with our parents and work with our community to say, it's a rolling drop-off, 8:15 to 8:30, because Jen, you are 100% right. It's crazy if you wait till 8:30, like, it's bonkers. But if people have that window to shoot for, 15 minutes could really help us. We're also gonna have to work with Goffstown Truck Center and get that Dunbarton bus that gets dropped off. Just really try to get them to roll in at like 8:10, 8:12, 8:15, because there's variability on that one, and they can be there as early as 8:05, and we're just not gonna have the teachers necessarily in their rooms to receive them. Their contract, I think, allows them to begin at like 8:05. But we're anticipating kids coming in, going home. Other questions? I think it's all elementary.
I'll take the next slide. So when we looked at the elementary school, I've broken this down into two sections of the grade levels, because we have kindergarten, which are our students who haven't been in school yet and who we haven't screened. So the first thing we're looking at is we need to do a screening. So our kindergarten students, on the first week that kids will be coming back, will be spending that week coming in for individual screenings. Typically, we used to have them come in groups of 10, but we didn't feel that was a good way to come in. Also, to have our people one-to-one with them. And then after that, we would develop the classes and do a staggered start. So kindergarten would probably take almost about 7 full days before all kindergartners who are choosing to come into school would be with us. Because also during that screening is another time where we particularly work with families about what it's like to come to school. And I would say typically in any year, about half our families are first-time parents with their oldest children coming to school. Currently, we have about 90 children enrolled for kindergarten. I'll go to the next slide, which is grades 1 through 4. So I'm starting with how we're coming into school, and we're looking to have those students come in 2 grades at a time. Right now, I've decided in looking at it that it'd be grades 1 and 4. And if you're going to ask me why I chose that first, I thought having the youngest and the oldest kids who are on 2 different floors start would be a nice way for us to see how things work. What we're concerned about as kids are coming in to Bell Elementary is really learning routines. So currently, we had a great practice of everyone walked in the front door every morning. And at the end of the day, it was a remarkable thing that 500 kids were either in a car at Bow Youth or on a bus in 15 minutes. That won't happen this year, because when they're doing that, they're pretty much shoulder to shoulder. So by having the kids come in 2 different grade levels, we get to see what it's like for how many parents are dropping off and picking up. I do have a concern about how we may have to stagger that, and we'd probably end up staggering it, as I think today, alphabetically, to work with family schedules as opposed to grade levels, as we have many multiple children for families within the school. So by having 2 grades come in at a time, that's going to give Tim and I a picture when we're standing out there of what it looks like to get families out of the car. So the second 2 grades were grades 2 and 3, and although they're on the same floor, we'll be well versed by the time we have them
come in to learn our routines. It also helps to have half the children in school and even our other half of the staff help us to see what it's like. We're going to do everything in the rooms. Specialists are going to go to the rooms, and we're going to start eating lunch in the rooms. We just felt by then creating a bigger cohort of up to 100, or even if it's 80 kids, if we're predicting that 85% of the kids are coming up, that's still 80 kids in the cafeteria. We felt when we're starting to keep that smaller. The other reason is I may need the cafeteria for classroom space. In 4th grade currently, there are 23 children per class. They will not fit in our class sizes, even at 3 feet. So what we're going to be doing next week is we'll be sending out another survey through the SAU. We need to know who's coming. That's really the big thing. For everything here, I have a general idea of, by the last survey done, of how many families were only going to come if it was blue, how many families were only going to come if it was blue-green, and I even have a general idea of what grade levels. But we kept all our classes rising forward, so if you were in 1 3rd grade class, your whole class went up to a 4th grade teacher. But I don't know if out of those 15% who's coming, if they're out of all 5 rooms, or if they're out of 1. You just don't know. So I'm really waiting for those numbers. And that's why also people's class teacher assignment could change. If I need to make more classrooms, we're going to reassign some of our teacher roles. And we've talked to our interventionists, who are also tend to be certified teachers, that they may not be interventionists. We may need to create smaller classes. I have found some other possible rooms to put people in to have a classroom. That means a lot of other staff will be on wheels. As much as the Unified Arts people will be going to rooms, I still need them to have a home base because they are teaching at least 25 classes worth of kids. So we are in this incredible holding pattern within the building. People are ready to come in and start unpacking, and I'm like, not yet, because that may not be your spot. So we're really waiting for those numbers to see what that's going to be about. So within the community, we're looking in grades 1 through 4 to really, as Shannon Bartlett had talked about, creating those cross cohorts. The elementary teachers and I had a Google Meet on Monday to start to share what that could look like and to generate ideas. I'll let you go to the next slide because this fits in with that. Some of the things that we're already doing around that, we have a lot of professional development. This week, our teachers in K through 2 are learning the Seesaw program, which will be in place of Google Docs. We're doing that along with Dunbarton. The first group went today. That's a tool that will not just be used for remote instruction, but also within the school. We want to be prepared if someone needs to go remote, whether it's a child who needs to go remote, or we need to go into orange or red, it's a day. So the kids already know how to use that tool. What was a challenge for us in the elementary school last year, particularly in grades, well, Kate didn't even have an email address till we went remote. So they learned how to use email and learned how to use Google Docs while we went remote. So by teaching our kids those digital tools, going right in, we'll be better set to just pivot to remote learning. Also, our Unified Art teachers, hats off to them, they're learning both platforms because they teach K through 4. So they're doing both Seesaw and Google Docs. Today, one of them said, can we do Seesaw for everyone? They liked it so much. The other tool is in both. We just adopted a new math program last year. We're going to Bridges Mathematics. Bridges is really offering a lot of remote lessons for us through math that will also be able to be uploaded to Google Docs and to Seesaw. So that's another tool, and our teachers are getting their training in that next week. We're also looking in those classrooms when we think about K and 1, and we think about how many children. So most of our class sizes, other than 4th grade, hover between 18 to 20. But 18 kindergartners in a room, we don't have an impact of wanting our kindergartners to be at a seat all day. And so we need to be able to allow them to have their seat area and their floor area for learning. So that really needs to bring your number, ideally, 10 to 12, when you think about the size of the rooms. 10 would be really tough in Bow Elementary based on our building size. So once again, those are the numbers that I'm looking for of who's remote, who's coming in. to look for that. If, trying to look at my own notes. Another thing we're going to talk about coming in, so young children bring an amazingly large backpack every day to school. And that kind of needs to end. I think some of them come to a backpack that's bigger than when I go away for a week on vacation when I only want to bring a carry-on. So to limit what's coming in, bring their school lunch, bring their snack, bring a water bottle, no toys, no extras. You need to limit what's coming in. We want to look at how we do the mask breaks of when they take those off and teaching young children to keep them in a safe place and a clean place. So we're looking at some different practices for that. And one of the things that I've also seen is there's some children who've yet to learn to tie their shoes, and that's a fair amount of kids. We would really recommend at this time Velcro sneakers. It's not that I'm not happy to tie someone's shoes, but in this, I think the less contact we are all able to have with people. Kind of sad because actually there's a special that we spend a lot of time tying shoes and learning to tie. So probably not something we can do at this time. Along with those cohorts for the specials, our music and art teachers are trying to create child-specific boxes of materials that they can use that's just there. So the music teacher is looking at just having a little box to create instruments because she knows singing isn't going to be a big option. As Adam and Brian both talked about, if we can go outside, we're going to go outside. If the music teacher can go outside, that's going to be great. We're also going to have to use our outside for recess. That'll be another challenge of giving areas for kids in their cohorts to play. Because once again, we're not going to have 80 kids as they have in the past all go in and intermingle while we're coming together. We're going to err on the side of keeping that cohort the same. So that'll be quite the scheduling. And the next slide.
Lori, anything about pre-K?
So I didn't mean to ignore pre-K, but it's now in the high school, so I sometimes do. And I think I'd probably refer to Marcy Kelly on what we're doing for pre-K, because that would be a different,
We're looking at staggered starts for them. They are going to arrive at a different entrance than 99% of the rest of the students at the high school. They'll arrive over by the SAU, and they have just the one classroom that they'll be in. Same thing for related services. They'll be right inside the classroom. If you look at the guidance from CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, they acknowledge how challenging it is for 3 and 4-year-olds to have a mask on, to keep it on, and to be physically distant from their other little friends. We're going to do our best for that, but also acknowledging that it is not practical to expect a 3-year-old to sit in a spot for 2.5 hours. So we're looking at how to maneuver that. We actually met today and are really eliminating most of the stuff from the room so that we can create as many opportunities for different seating options for kids.
That's something also true for our K-3 one and even just for all elementary students for the manipulatives we use of how to keep those learning tools for themselves. We did send out at the end of last year, parents to send in a box of their own school supplies, which will be just for that child, of the pencils, crayons, scissors that they can use to keep that for themselves. And as Adam had talked about, and I'm a good example today, this mask hasn't fallen all day until tonight. But getting the cleaning process through. So when we're eating lunch or when we're out of there, how to go through and clean, having the extra custodian during the day that Dean had talked about for Dwayne's presentation. We do have some rooms with bathrooms, not all of them do. So the monitoring of young children using the bathrooms and going back and forth is really just a lot of the routine work that we're going to do and build our culture. And really it's about taking care of each other and being aware of each other and learning as young children how to come to school and learn a whole different set of routines. We're readily aware that for grades 1 through 4, it's going to look really different. But I also think we have a great group of kids who, when we come together and want to work together, I've seen it go really well. So I'm really optimistic for coming in. We have a group working on our universal norms, a group of teachers that already met this week, of what does it look like to be in BES during the day. and how we're gonna move through the building and how we're gonna learn and care for each other. So, I think we can make it work. And I really appreciate the feedback that the teachers have been giving me and the parents along the way.
All right, quick question, Bryce Larrabee, from school board again. The remote learning slide is up, and so could you just walk me through, I'm in that 15%, you know, we're green and 85% of your class is there. What's going on a typical day for that 15%?
So that 15% would be, what I'm thinking is there is a teacher who would be the primary remote teacher per grade level, depending upon how that works. As I looked at it, it was probably about 15 to 20 kids per grade, but they could go in and out of certain classrooms, as Shannon had talked about, either to meet their specific needs in math or reading. So what we've talked about is within that, not just the morning meeting, but we really want to up the academic portion for what we did so that there's more live exchange during the day. At the same time, I've had parents tell me that because particularly for the younger grades, the parent needs to be there. And for some of our parents, they've said, you know, we really won't be able to be there during the school hours. It has to have an adaptability for that parent to be able to get to it later. Which, so for instance, in Seesaw, those lessons would not just be video, they'd also be interactive lessons where someone could watch the lesson and do the work. Different than the Flipgrid that was used last year, which was simply just video to video. And even we sort of felt like we weren't always sure if someone didn't respond to a Flipgrid video, we're like, did they watch it? Whereas through Seesaw, there's more, if you will, for all of us, check and balance of the work that's done, that's turned in, and so that we can further assess kids' progress. So there would be daily mini lessons along the way for those kids. Depending upon how it goes, I wouldn't rule out how the numbers fall, that there could be a teacher who had, just as I'm going to throw it out, grades 1 and 2 because there was a smaller cohort than expected. My understanding, listening to most parents, most people with the young children really want to come in because remote was very difficult to do. But that's just my first impressions. Yes.
Martin Oslo, Bow School. I got a quick question about the kindergarten screening. You said that you will meet individually with each child 1 hour throughout, I think it was 5 days. Right? Yeah. So is the expectation that each kindergartner will still attend full-time those 5 days, even though it's really just
No, really just that screening week would just be that hour.
Okay, so there's a lot of back and forth.
So there's a little back and forth. So there would be just, so I'd be contacting you to set up that appointment when we, probably going to start that next week when we know. And then for the first 2 days, I would have, if you were assigned to, I'm just going to throw the teacher's name, if you were in Mrs. Kropa's class, I'd probably have half her class come on the first days of school for kindergarten, and then the second half of the class come the next day. So that those kids can also have a slower start, learn routines. And I'm probably just, really wanting to put off the whole every parent driving into school as long as I can. But that's how we're going to work that out for them. I'm anticipating it's going to take 5 days to do the screening. Although when I did some math, I might get it done in 4. So depends upon registrations keep coming in. People keep buying homes. So, yes,
Jennifer Strongman, Bow School Board. Did you address, I'm sorry, you've been here a while now, and I apologize. Are you doing a staggered start, or are you having everyone drop off at the same time?
I'm gonna have to do a staggered, but I don't know what it looks like. And that's why I like starting staggered by the grade levels. I'm gonna anticipate that, so last year parents started dropping off at 7:30, and even though school started at 8, it was not unusual for Tim and I to be out there at 8:05, 8:10.
And I know I've harped on it on all 3 levels, or all 3 buildings, but I'm just highly concerned about how much time that's going to take. And then if we're also having to figure out if they filled out their questionnaire. And I mean, I'm just thinking, we're not even gonna start school, in theory, until a good 45 minutes into where we should have started.
I think that's true of our schedule, and Adam talked about that. Because even the Unified Arts said, let's drop our classes down to 40 minutes. Because I also have to give them enough time to go between classes and clean. I need to have the hallways when they're going out to recess or somewhere else. I don't want all the kids in the hallway. Even though we've done a really good job of getting everything out in the hallways, they're not that wide. And granted, in elementary school, you don't walk down the hallway without an adult largely during the course of the day. Definitely keeping a schedule will affect the amount of time for instruction. I don't see how it won't. Because there is a part of the day that's going to be based on routine. That's going to take it a whole lot longer. Probably the one thing that will help, one of the things that Tiffany and I are talking about, is she really wanted the kids to come down to the cafeteria and get their lunch. And I completely understand why she wanted to. And I sort of said, is it a compromise? So for instance, kindergarten's at the far end of the building from the caf. And so we agreed kindergarten won't do that. Because that would probably add another 20 minutes to lunch. So we're really looking at, whereas fourth grade, even though they're at that end of the building, not even worried about it. There's independent, that could become a real sense of responsibility in helping out your class to do that. So we're still really working out all those details. And I know it sounds hard, but I think we're going to be working it out while we do it. I don't have a picture. I do have a picture. Ms. Bryce will sometimes say what keeps you up at night. This keeps me up at night of how to get those schedules going. But I also know that everyone has lots of good ideas, and collaboratively, we'll figure it out for the kids.
So I think there's quite a few differences, even though we're both elementary schools, between Dunbarton Elementary School and Bow Elementary School, with the biggest difference being size. And so there's a couple of differences with how we're running things. If we can just go to the next slide. So as it says at the top of that, discussions in progress, and as Dr. Cascadden had mentioned, you run farther as a group. And as a group at Dunbarton Elementary School, we're still trying to figure out what our running stride is, what kind of group shape we're going to run in, so to speak. So this probably isn't the way it's going to look when it rolls out, but it is still going to follow the SAU 67 hybrid learning plan. So I wouldn't necessarily ignore that, but I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it right now. The one thing that we do want to try to build is redundancy in planning and consistency in planning. I think we saw with our last remote learning foray that there were a lot of good things happening, but they were kind of all over the place depending on what class you're in and what grade you're in. And we need to make sure that we can get that more streamlined, because a lot of times when I'm making decisions, I'm thinking about my own kids, 5-year-old, 10-year-old, and 13-year-old, but I'm also thinking about teachers and trying to figure out what works. And I'm also thinking about myself as a parent. I feel for parents of younger children that choose remote learning. I think it's going to be very difficult, no matter how we shake it out. So I think that needs to come into play when you make that decision, and I wouldn't make it lightly, because I don't know how I could do remote learning with my 5-year-old, following the schedule and making sure she's jumping on, and so on and so forth. So just keep that in mind. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the main goal, as Dr. Bartlett had mentioned, is individualized instruction, and that is going to be the key to making this work, so that we have students that are at home with remote instruction, and then we have students in the classroom. If we can individualize it as much as possible, it's going to work for them. We want to use the flexible grouping, as was mentioned, and we also want to look into the workshop model and find out how to best make that work for us at Dunbarton Elementary. What I mentioned consistency before, we're going to look into iReady, and that platform will allow, if we keep that consistent K-6, that's going to make it really easy for parents, really easy for students, and easy for classrooms as well. We are also going to, I keep wanting to call it TikTok, what is it?
Seesaw.
We are going to use Seesaw for K-2. And we will use the Google Classroom 3 through 6. And that's another point of our consistency. And if we can go to the next slide. And obviously, we need to use technology in order for the remote portion of this to work. I think everyone's a little bit hesitant about technology because of the screen time, but as has been mentioned, it's not going to be technology focused. The technology is the vehicle that we're using to get there. So I think that just needs to be kept in mind. There were a couple of questions as we were going through with safety procedures and such. Mr. Simons has already created some dividers, and we're going to use those not only as PPE, so to speak, even though there's some debate out there of the effectiveness, but it's going to show students where to sit. So we have those dividers set, and students know this is my space and where to sit. There's also discussion of sharing materials. Elementary kids share materials constantly. We want to look into boxes, individual boxes for students, so their learning kit would go in there, and that's where all the materials would stay. And we had our multi-tiered systems of support for behavior meeting just recently, and our focus is going to be starting the school year and what the procedures look like and the shift from coming into the school and shifting into learning. And that's going to actually be really helpful for us just getting the protocols set. And we are going to do our kindergarten screening similar to what's going on at Bow Elementary in the first 2 days. And we're going to use that staggered start as well. The schedule will come out just so that we can buy some more time for students to really understand how things have changed and what their quote unquote new normal is. And I think one of the bigger differences between Bow Elementary and Dunbarton Elementary, the luxury of having a bigger school is that you can have a remote teacher that's going to cover within that grade level. If we used a remote teacher to cover all the remote teaching, that teacher would have multiple grade levels at once. That to me feels like an organizational nightmare. So we're going to look at trying to keep it much more of the hybrid setup. And also, if we have teachers that go remote, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to have the classroom management in there with adults in the classroom, and the teacher is remote with those students that are in person, but also remote with the students that are outside of school. Sounds difficult, but it'll be much easier than trying to have a teacher deal with 2 to 3 different grade levels at once, or possibly 4, depending on how many remote teachers we have. So other than that, I don't know if there are any questions related to how we're looking at this.
I'm Matt in Dunbarton School Board. So it's currently in work, Owen, but how long until it's finalized? Do you have an idea?
So we'll meet with the teachers again. We met with them today. We'll meet with them again either Monday or Tuesday. I think Dr. Bartlett will hopefully be a part of that. We can kind of figure out where we're at and how the system's going to look. Right now, it looks like it's more grade level focused, but trying to figure out how to incorporate all of the facets of the hybrid thing.
Okay. And the other one I had was for building drills like the active shooter or fire. How do we accomplish those in a socially distant manner?
I just got news of a webinar that the state is going to give guidance on how to do those remotely.
Remotely?
I kind of had the same pause, but it's on my list of things to look at. There's guidance on it, so I'll look for it.
And one of the staff members today asked the perfect question. How do you do anything from 3 to 6 feet with a 5 and a 6-year-old? I don't have a great answer. It's going to be different.
Yeah. No, I think you guys are doing a great job. I think everyone's doing a great job. Thanks.
What is Nicole Sloan, Dunbarton School Board? What will lunch look like?
So currently we're looking at lunch in the classroom.
In recess is happening?
Recess is happening. We need to work with school nurses and stuff to figure out if we're just going to divide up the recess area or if we're going to have to come up with a really crazy 14-period recess schedule.
Jeff Moody, Dunbar. Could you expand or just clarify a little bit about what you were talking about 2 or 3 or 4 teachers going remote? I wasn't following that exactly.
So some teachers may need to go remote based on their personal needs, their maybe underlying health issues or family members with underlying health issues. If that teacher ends up going remote, meaning they have to work away from school, then we're going to have to find a way for them to continue to do their job and teach students. And currently, the way we're looking at it, with the grade level setups that we have the 2 teachers per grade level. Instead of trying to pull them out and then backfill all the students into the other grade levels, because it literally would mean that we would have to set it back up, and maybe some grades only have one teacher now instead of two teachers. And Dunbar traditionally has always had the two teachers, so you can keep the class sizes low. Not to mention COVID makes it difficult to do that. We want to keep them within that grade level, but then we're going to have to find an adult who can come in there and cover the classroom management, make sure the kids are doing what they need to do based on the schedule, and getting them logged in to meet with the teacher. So that's taking someone from something else that they're supposed to do to that. But there's sacrifices we're making everywhere with this.
Jeff made a great point. We've been talking about students and community and other people, and do we have a survey on staff and teachers on their willingness to come back? Because under Owen's scenario, he could have 3 teachers that choose remote and really change up the dynamics. It'd be nice to know that ahead of time. As Lori said, we're putting the question out to students. Did I miss it, or are we going to address that?
I think as we get into the next steps, we need to get some hard data. I think the caveat I have to say to you is just because it's tied up into employment contract.
Well, I just don't touch the union issue. Just we heard from any teacher outside of the
The
union.
principals have been talking to teachers informally.
Okay.
As far as you need to give me this. So yes, we've been exploring.
That's all.
So that aside, just curious, because you touched on it, but none of the BO teachers really did. What is going to be the role of a pure remote teacher? Will they have their own classroom? Will they be supporting remote students? Do you guys have any idea? Because there will be teachers that
There will
need to
be,
teach
and so
remote
it's
for
really
reasons.
looking for that number match. So you're right, the teachers have talked to us, and some have provided more detail and are at a place when they're making that decision.
It would be magical if it all.
It all worked out.
So we're hoping to see it all work out before we make a
Because
definitive plan.
you couldn't just assume that at each
Yeah.
grade level there's one teacher, because
Yep,
at some grade
that
levels
makes
there'll be
sense.
none, and at some there might be more than one. And that same goes, our paraprofessionals as well. So we haven't had as much contact. We haven't had contact with them really at this point.
But I guess
most of us have had individual
it all worked
conversations.
out. If you had a class of fourth graders, like enough to make a class that was all gonna go remote, and you had a fourth grade teacher that was gonna go remote, instead of these integrated plans you talked about, would that be the new?
Conceivably,
Okay,
it took
okay.
more of both probably than Dunbar, because we're big.
Okay.
In high school, we have more luxury.
Right, high school's a little
You know,
different, I guess
it's
middle
different
school
up here,
and.
In some instances, it's easier to make some matches work, right? So you can, that's why I said some teacher schedules might be kind of shifting around. If we have a teacher who needs to stay home, for whatever reason, that they have medical issues or whatever the case may be, we may give them a different set of classes to teach, because those are all going to be online courses and all be remote, so we can do that match. Or they may have the sections that have to be remote. If we spread across, math, for example, if we have 5 different sections of remote, two algebra 2s that are remote, 2 algebra 1s that are remote, and geometry are remote, the remote teacher may end up teaching those 5 sections, to kind of put max needs to match things up and everything, kind of make it work. We have the advantage of doing that. In high school, I feel, I've said probably 100 times to these guys, I feel for some of those constraints that they have, but we're definitely taking that into consideration as we kind of make these type of decisions and try. That's why, stress we're doing safety for everyone in the school community, staff, students, even families of all those people, families of staff, families, students, and trying to get all of it.
So if a teacher has to quarantine, they're asymptomatic, or they have COVID, they don't have COVID, whatever reason, they can't teach for an extended period of time. What does that look like? And hear me out. Does that mean that essentially they're on the screen, like we're seeing there on the PowerPoint? The classroom is full of kids, some adult is in here making sure essentially safety protocols are being adhered to, and for 10 days, that's how the instruction would more or less be?
Could be.
Is that
That's one of the
Yeah.
options.
Okay.
That's definitely one of the options.
Okay.
The other thing is parents have asked me, some parents have reached out to me separately going, well, what if I didn't feel comfortable being in green until I saw how it went? Could I come then? So we wouldn't want you're in 1 week, you're out another week, because that's just too hard. But, when someone said, I think we'd be ready in 6 weeks. I was like, then that would be okay. Because having a student after 6 weeks is one thing. Conceivably, there could be people that come back and go, you know what, I'm just not comfortable with it. So flexibility, while also keeping on top of it all, is a bit of an organizational challenge.
And what if it's a specialist teacher that chooses to go remote, or needs to go remote here for health reasons? Do you scrap that? Like if there's no art teacher in the elementary school?
Yeah, right. I've had different ideas.
I think the big thing tonight,
Yeah.
I think the big thing tonight is rolling out that concept, like this is the framework we're gonna try and build around. I think what Lori said a little bit ago about the numbers is critical. I think every one of the principals is waiting for really two very important numbers. One is what students are committed to coming back, based on what level. We really need to know that with like grade levels and names and that sort of thing. And then the teachers and their ability to come back because of the underlying health conditions and those very legitimate concerns that Owen raised. And so I think what we, and I can't speak for the other schools, but I'm sure they're similar, tried to put together was a framework that's nimble enough that we're going to be able to adjust within that. And like, for instance, I didn't get that deeply into the weeds when I was talking essentially up front. Like it may be different in the middle school for 5th and 6th as opposed to 7th and 8th. Like I have different thoughts, and I think Doug and I have different thoughts in our head about how we would respond to those remote pieces based on that age group difference, because they've really become different programs between 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th. And I'll bet it's similar for Lori at the elementary school and her grade levels, and probably Brian has even more flexibility than, he's got a greater spectrum. And then should we transition levels like yellow and green, like we've thought a lot about how those plans pivot. They are gonna have to flex. So really what we present tonight is the framework, I think, that look at it that way.
Good, you ready to move on to sports? I actually picked up my paper the other day and there were actual sports in the sports section. I was like, oh my goodness. I talked to my wife last night and said, hey, let's sit down and watch some sports on TV. She wasn't too excited about that either. So instead we watched PBS, which we often do. I look at this plan before we move on to sports. It's incredibly complex. It's incredibly trying to respond to a whole lot of different needs. And I would be depressed except for one thing. I know the quality of people who are working on this plan. I know the quality of people, of administrators. I know the quality of students and parents that I have in this district. It's going to take a lot of hard work working together to try to make it work. The hard thing about matching up remote teaching with needs, you have to look at the person who says that I go to remote teaching. You have to look at what their skills and abilities are, what their subject area is. And there will be times when we will have a perfect match and everything will work out great. And there will be times when we are going to have to say, it doesn't match. And then we have to go back to our employment contracts and we have to have some hard discussions about some things. And there's a non-public session at the end of today to talk about some of the contractual issues that we have to deal with in this plan. But let's go into sports. NHIA sports. First of all, NHIA does not determine what sports are played in the state. What you have to understand about the NHIA is their sole purpose in the state is to run state tournaments. And they set rules for state tournaments. And because people want to participate and win state tournaments, they abide by those rules. So you have to kind of remember that. It's like NHIA doesn't tell us what sport. I am on the NHIA council. I am the superintendent representative to council. We met this morning. They will recognize this season. That was the first vote we took, which means that there is going to be a season, a fall season, with possible tournaments and so forth. However, I want to emphasize, it is a local decision to play. What, how, and when. There are districts that have already announced that they are not playing contact sports, soccer, field hockey, and football. There are districts who have announced that they are going to play those sports, but they're not going to travel outside of a local area. There are districts who announced that they may play those sports, but there's going to be delays. So I want to emphasize, whatever the NHIA decides, it's still our local decision of what, how, and when we play. There are sports-specific safety protocols that have been developed and are being provided. And I have to admit that I haven't gone deeply into there. Mike Deslitz is here. He's our athletic director. He will be looking at those safety-specific protocols. I think the other thing we have to recognize is that kids are playing sports right now. They're playing in club sports. They're playing in other ways. We have some summer programs going on. Sports have some summer development that they can do and not part of the season. Kids are out there playing sports right now. One of the things we established today, there are no practices or team meetings prior to September 8th. One of the things I tried to emphasize to the NHIA is if they started the season or they started sports meetings or practices or anything prior to school opening, that many places would just say we can't play. We have to establish our school protocols. We have to get our kids in school and establish some things before we can play. So that was a decision to put that off. The other thing that is the first day to compete in tournaments still need to be determined, because in football, there's a very strong heat acclimation protocol and a very strong conditioning protocol that needs to be followed. So football needs a longer preseason to come in, but bass fishing, you can usually compete on the first day of the season opening. I can show you a picture on my phone. I've been doing my preseason bass work, and I have, I've been working on that already. But so those sort of things are in flux. But the big thing is, it's a local decision. There are some big parameters that we need to follow. Nothing's going to happen until September 8th. Next slide, please. My leveled recommendations is that at the green level, the sports and co-curriculars will operate within guidelines at the high school level. So whatever specific guidelines come out, we would operate sports there. We would possibly discuss local limits to scheduling and travel. One of the really difficult of running NHIA sports this year is who else is going to make a decision to play. We may make a decision to play football. We may have to look around for a team to play because not all districts are going to open the same way. That's part of their issue with not having a statewide plan. That there will be some districts that don't. We may say, okay, we're going to have football, but we're only going to play teams in a very localized area. We're only going to play the teams in the capital region area or things like that. We may limit travel, we may limit scheduling to look at that. One of the things the NHIA is discussing is the concept of an open tournament. Remember, that is what the NHIA does. They schedule state tournaments. And so one of the things they're discussing is that no matter how long your season is, no matter how long you played or whatever, everyone gets invited to the tournament if you want to go. And that is, usually in the NHIA, there are very strict rules about what you have to do to get in the tournament. But because of everything that's going on, because of shortened seasons and so forth, that whole concept of open tournament may be allowed. At the yellow level, my recommendation is we stop any interscholastic play, and there is no contact sport practices. So at the yellow level, we make a decision that we would have no contact sports, field hockey, soccer, and football, and there would be no inter-school play at all. We wouldn't go visit other schools. So that is my recommendation, and it is, again, like everything else in this plan, going to be debated. If your next slide. Other co-curriculars or other considerations, any clubs that we operate, if we can operate them in small group, hybrid, and remote only. I know the engineering club is in this summer. There's a small group of kids working. They're masked up. They're working on their robots, and it's a small group. And If you can do that within our guidelines, that'd be great. Middle school sports, what I'm thinking is that we would say no inter-school play. That we would have middle school sports, it's mostly about participation and development. We look to run more of an intramural program there and keep kids in our own community. We may have to limit spectators, and we may put PPA and social distancing rules. We can only have so many spectators, and you have to wear a mask, and you have to stay with your family group. This is all just a little more fuzzy than anything else. And then the last thing is special considerations for wind instruments and singing. We have to discuss with our music teachers and our band and chorus what we can do. You probably don't know this, but I've been learning to play my guitar and sing. And the other day I got on the end of my dock and was belting out to the whole lake, my Bob Dylan's, and I was amazed at how much stuff was coming out. And singing is especially a problematic activity. We'll have to look at that. Woodwind instruments. There's been interesting forward to me by my music teachers. Most woodwind instruments are not a problem except for the flute, because the flute you blow across the instrument, and that's a problem. So we'll have to look at things like that as we go ahead. I'm not sure. Mike, do you have anything to add, or would you like to talk a little bit about what's been happening in sports?
Yeah, sure. Got real quickly, and the two big things that I took out of the meeting that they had at the NHI this morning were, first of all, the start date. So we were supposed to start on August 17th. So that's, nearly two full weeks ahead of where school would come in. So that was always going to be an issue, and there was a conversation with all the ADs in the state of how can we really do this. So that was a bit of a relief that we got. What I thought was going to be 2 turned into 3 weeks, which is great. The other big thing is the open tournament. So in my mind, an open tournament means that now it's open season. So whatever work we did on the schedules, that we can just dump that out, and that's fine. Now we can control where or when we're going to play a little bit more. Like we can stay local. We can play MP 3 times if we have to. We can, we don't have to necessarily travel into what would be more of a New Hampshire hotspot, something like that. Limit travel, limit bus time. If we, transportation would be an entirely different issue. So that was big, that we can control more of where these kids are going. The kids are out there, right? You can't go by any field and not see a bunch of kids out there, including our field. So if I went to football tonight, they're out there. There's 40-something kids. Participation is great with everything. Girls soccer's here, boys soccer's here, cross country's here. So they're doing it. They're preparing for it. They want to play. If we don't, they're still going to play. We just won't have that control. So again, just my opinion, I guess, but I can look at the soccer roster and probably, if we don't have a Bow High School girls soccer team, I could probably take 6 girls off of that all of a sudden just went to Seacoast, and they're going to play in tournaments all weekend long, all season long, and then come back to school Monday morning after being in New Jersey and playing against 8 different teams from who knows where. So the open tournament concept, I think, is great because it gives us that flexibility, and it gives us some control. So I think it's important, it's co-curricular, it's part of the education-based athletics, is part of being in high school or in middle school, and I know there's other concerns with that. So those are the big things I took, from that meeting, that we can now potentially have some flexibility in where we go.
Jeff Moody, Dunbarton. When you mentioned about no inter-school play, I think I'd like a clarification whether or not you would consider Dunbarton to be able to play intramurals with Bow, because we're such a small school and we have kids who love sports too.
And I think I need more, and to tell you, I want to be totally honest. It was the last thing we got to.
Yeah.
It was the NHIA meeting today. The other thing that we were talking about at the middle school level, we haven't heard from Cap City. But I think this is an area where we'll have room to develop.
Well, my son played a Cap City tournament this weekend in Hampton, so they're playing.
Yeah, and we would definitely consider that, because again, in my mind, you have a community. You can say we're separating out Dunbarton Elementary School from Bow kids, but in reality, they're all mixing at the high school. They're all mixing at the middle school. Then they're going home to family groups. So you have to think, in reality, that mixing is already there. And so, it doesn't make sense to say we're going to keep that separate when in reality, it's really not going to provide any extra protection.
Thank you.
Did you mean Tri-County?
Yeah, what did I say?
Cap City. So Tri-County League is the middle school, all of our middle school teams play in the Tri-County League. They haven't said anything at this point, and I assume that they would wait till after the NHIA decided when they were gonna start. So, where we go with that, that's boys and girls soccer, it's field hockey and cross country all play in that league, which has kind of schools from all over, and not really north of here, but most of them are, west or south of us. So that, I assume we'll get some word on if they're even gonna offer that season for middle school sometime soon.
Mike, just to clarify on the EMS sport, the reason why we haven't really played with Dumbarton previously is most of our team sports are really 7th and 8th grade. So by then, the Dumbarton kids are actually in our team sports.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about our 5th and 6th graders and 4th graders who we might field 1 or 2 basketball teams and have good players, but if we just have to play against each other for an entire year, I don't think that, I think that there would
More
be
of a rec league thing, kind of.
I'm sorry?
More of a rec league thing then?
Well, I mean, if we talk about rec league, we talk about Merrimack Basketball League, right? That Bow and Dunbarton typically play in that league. Bow might field between men or boys and girls, they might field 10 teams and Dunbarton would field 4 or 5, right? So if that league isn't going on this year, then I would assume that the same number of kids from Bow would probably still want to play basketball, and the same number of kids from Dunbarton would still want to play. Dunbarton would probably like to play in intramurals with Bow.
Could be on the table. You can see that would be on the table. All right, next slide, I just we'll wrap this up. Next steps. After I finish talking, the board is going to have a chance to have whatever discussion they would like to do. The board could make motions and decisions on improving the plan in whole or part tonight. The board could say there are parts of the plan that need more work. I think I've already identified to you, we have parts we definitely need to work on. Monday, my schedule, not tomorrow, but Monday, the administrators will all be back in here. We'll start working on a survey that would be going out to establish a green, yellow, or orange participation. The first survey we sent out was a little confusing, and also people didn't have enough information. I think a difficult thing here is when I look at some of the procedures we've put in place to address infection control and COVID, go against educational best practices. Educational best practices, don't put kids in a grid, put them in flexible grouping, have them move around, do those sort of things. COVID best practices, put them in an unmoving grid apart from each other, have them all face forward. So there's going to be people who look at these infection control things that we're putting in place in order they bring kids into school and say, I'm choosing not to send my child to that environment. So I think after tonight, of course, we have a comment period that's open until next Thursday. I think after tonight, we'll be able to put a survey out with a lot more understanding, and we'll be able to get some hard numbers. And then the other thing I see, and I go back to Peter Drucker, who was a management consultant who rebuilt the auto industry in Japan after World War II. He had some principles. You make decisions as close to the line as you can. A lot of the decisions we're talking about need to be made by people who are as close to the work as possible. Teachers need to be involved in the decision, aides need to be involved in the decision, people who are on the day-to-day ground floor doing it. The other thing he said is, today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. And he wasn't being cynical, it's just that every time you make a decision, it solves the problem that you're looking at, but it may create an additional problem that you have to deal with later on. And I think that's the hard thing. We've had these ideas, we've said this is our best guess, not guess, this is our best thought about what we're doing. But as we play that out and we look at the intended and unintended consequences of that decision, we say, nope, that's not going to work, and we need to go to something else. So a little bit fluid. So at this time, our presentation is done. I want to thank the administrators who have worked very, very hard on this, and I'll turn it over to Jared Duncan, who is the SAU board chair.
You had me in the front of the room, so I couldn't see anybody. All right, board. I think on behalf of everyone here, thank you very much to Dr. C and everyone in the room, the administrators, all the staff and admin that have been doing a great job to keep this rolling and provide such a thorough proposed plan on a very complicated subject. I think what I'll do first is just ask the board members what their preference is on how we proceed. We didn't put an agenda together. We can talk about it. Before I do that, I just want to recognize that we have received 75 to 100, maybe, I don't know how many comments, and we've read, I've read them all. Most of us have reviewed them. Yep.
We did have one public comment that we were going to allow, and I see that.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I just wanted to recognize those comments. We will get through them. We're not going to respond to them all tonight. A lot of them will be answered by the people in the better position to respond as we move through this all. But at this time, yes, we'd like to recognize Sue Priebus. Are you able to speak? Go ahead, give it a try.
Oh, are you hearing me right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. So I have a very brief. I'm sorry?
Go ahead and introduce yourself for everyone.
Okay. I'm Sue Priebus. I teach at Bow Memorial School, and I am the president of the Bow Education Association. So I have a very brief statement to share on behalf of the Bow Education and Bow Educational Support Staff Associations. Just very briefly, the teachers and support staff have been working collaboratively with administration for weeks, both as individuals and through their unions. We appreciate everyone's hard work and recognize that we all have a common goal. We look forward to continuing to work together to create a safe, achievable plan for the reopening of the Bow schools and for the year ahead. We trust that the teachers and staff who are directly affected by this plan will continue to have a voice. It's premature for me to comment on any plan specifics during this meeting, since aspects of any plan approved by the board may be modified or supplemented by negotiated agreements. We will be advocating for the safest possible work environment, and any plan that does not provide a safe environment will be challenged. We miss our students greatly, and we're anxious to return to our work of educating them safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Sure.
Okay, I will ask the board their preference. First, I'll ask a housekeeping matter. Do we need to open this up, or are we open as a board meeting already?
No, this was a board.
Okay. So I'll put it to the board members. Anyone?
I'm Matt Dunbarton. I feel like the easiest thing to do is grab some low-hanging fruit. Should we just approve the calendar that was presented as a board? Is that something we need to do, or do you want to discuss that first?
The calendar for the school year?
The opening.
The 3 days of the teacher training.
Okay, let's go back to the, yeah, I have that. I know what you're talking about now.
Roy, could you bring the PowerPoint slide up of the opening? It's very early on.
In my mind,
I think it's slide page 9.
Page 9, correct. Okay, so Tuesday, August 25th and 6th were previously planned staff preparation. 27th, 31st, 3 student days converted to staff planning. 1st and 3rd, rolling group start as determined by each building. Full green operational status, BMS and DHS September 8th, BES and DES September 10th. You were proposing?
Well, I would say that I think part of that is approving the 3 days of professional development before student involvement is in there. That's more what I mean, that we can discuss where we're opening, whether it's green, yellow, whatever, further down, but.
So the second bullet, first and second bullet?
Yeah, the opening day would have been 25, and the staff would have been here for 25, 26. Now Dr. C is proposing the 27th, whatever the rest of those days are 3 student days converted to staff planning. So that would be 27, 28, and the 31st is a Monday.
Yep.
And then, so the first day of student involvement would be September 1st.
Right, and then we are gonna have some sort of rolling start. Really in concept, we're getting rolling after Labor Day. So all those people who are, we don't want to start till after Labor Day. This may be the year.
Which I think this calendar is separate of, you know, the upper.
Yes.
And I would think that's very easy for us to let parents know that September 1st is the earliest time your kids will be there in the school.
Clem, are you making a motion to approve the school opening timeline as reflected on the slide number 9?
Yes, I would do that if we want to discuss it. But yeah.
Well, except that he's only talking about bullet 2 and 3. The full green would be a different motion, potentially.
Just in terms of.
Or you could wrap them all
Yes,
together.
but the date.
But it's still the date.
The date.
So that's what I'm proposing. If the board wants to discuss it, we can do it. I'll make a motion.
So they don't have a concern with those dates.
He's got to make a motion before we can discuss.
Oh,
All right, I make a motion to approve the school opening timeline in respect to the dates with the student involvement being pushed back to September 1st, if that accurately reflects what we're trying to do.
I second that.
Can I ask if we're taking notes on this?
There's minutes being.
Wendy Gilman's taking a minute.
Beautiful. Okay, so Jenna Reardon seconded, Clem had motioned. Any discussion? Any objection?
Is the September 8th and 10th dates part of your motion, or is that not part of the motion?
Well, I think that depends on how we open, at what level, and I think.
Either way, though, wouldn't it still also be, even if it's yellow at those dates still?
Why don't you start the only
Okay.
I would think.
I'm not sure where that would fit in, but I feel like just making sure parents know that kids won't be, no matter where you are, involved in school until the 1st.
Regardless of the color, you're not going to start before September 1st. All in favor?
Jared, point of order. Jared, point of order.
Jeff?
I think this needs to be a roll call vote.
Okay. Jeff Drexler?
Yes.
Jeff Moody?
yes.
Clem Madden?
Yes.
Eric Schulman?
Yes.
Nicole Sloan?
Yes.
Jenna Reardon?
Yeah.
Jim Strong Rain?
Yes.
Bryce Larrabee?
Yes.
Martin Oxalo?
Yes.
Jared Duncan? Yes. And remember all your names. Okay. All right, so that's the first thing. Clem, did you have? Yeah. Okay, so we've done that. What else do we want to do tonight?
Discuss the plan,
Okay.
green code plan. I want to say thanks, echo Jared's sentiments, say thank you to Dr. C and your staff. You did a great job. There's a ton of work involved in all this. There's a ton of detail. I don't know how to approach it, but maybe something is, if anyone wants to discuss it, we can improve the plan that's currently designed, but reserve decision on what color to open in, pending further public input, data on active cases locally, and finalizing operational aspects. If that makes any sense, or, let's start the conversation.
So you want a motion to approve the SAU 67 operating level matrix as presented?
I want it, yeah, as currently.
As displayed.
That's not saying.
As displayed on
Right.
page 6 over there on the
Right.
screen,
Right, not saying which level.
but to approve that matrix as our usable.
Right, and I think there's an expanded matrix beyond that.
Second.
Okay, any thoughts, concerns, questions?
Jarrett, I need a clarification because it's really hard to hear from way up here in Maine exactly what Clem was talking about.
I actually like what you said in the motion. So could you just?
The way you word that.
I would like and make a motion to approve the plan as currently designed, but reserve decision on what color to open in, pending further public input, data on active cases locally, and finalizing the operational aspects. But the framework, I think, is a solid one with the colors of green, yellow, orange, red, and blue. I think it's just a very clear plan. We don't need to finalize where we're opening today, but certainly I think we can adopt this framework because it's going to be fine-tuned regardless of what we decide.
Second.
Any discussion?
Did you hear that, Jeff?
Yeah, basically, we're in favor of the plan as a concept,
Yes,
Well, the matrix,
okay?
but we're not deciding at what point we are at this, whatever.
Can I, are we discussing it?
yes.
I guess this is for Dean, for a point of clarification. If we aren't at the green status now, when would we ever be at the green status? What would the green status reflect if we aren't in that position right now?
Well, I think you raised a good question, and if Dwayne were here, he has said it to me repeatedly. If we're not green now, what changes in any of the environmental matrix to say that we go green? The issue is we have to develop those numbers and metrics, and like I said, I didn't feel comfortable doing it without further input about when you change from green to yellow. But at this point, if I was making the decision right now today, looking at community infection rates and school infection rates as I know them, I would say we're opening green. Now, I mean, it's 30 days from now, a month from now, if those numbers change, and if we fine tune this, when we make those decisions, and there is a spike in community cases, and I have reports from that some of our students have tested positive COVID-19, then I think that would I would say let's open in yellow. However, reading some of the comments, reading some of the feedback, and I got to admit, I didn't read them thoroughly, I just read them tonight. There are people who say in the present context, the only way we can open is yellow because we have to be 6 feet of distance. So when I listened to Clem's motion, one of the things that was in there was we may not want to make the color status tonight because we may want to let people digest this a little bit more. We may want to look at, refining these numbers or refining this a little bit more and refining some of our operations a little bit more. But to answer your question, Bryce, right now, with everything I've read, I would say we're opening green.
And so a follow-up question would be to your point on the 6 feet. I believe, right, the director of education for the state was the one, right, that said a minimum of 3 feet?
And a what?
Yeah.
It's in the state guidance.
Okay, it's in the state guidance, but
In the state
my
guidance.
question is, I don't believe at any of the 4 schools we could ever open at green. We can never be at green because at none of the 4 schools would we have 100% ability to have 6 feet spacing. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Well, green includes aiming for 6 for the minimum.
No. I have to have 6, which means we cannot guarantee 6 feet spacing at any of the 4 schools.
And be green.
Yes.
Correct. That's why the green plan says it's a goal of 6 but a minimum of 3.
Okay.
If the statement is we have to have 6 feet of spacing, it means we have to open in yellow, and as administrators, we need to go back. And that's the other thing we'll be starting to do on Monday, is flushing out the yellow and the orange more. But if you say it has to be 6 feet, we are in yellow, and we need to figure out how to reduce capacity in an equitable and fair way.
And can never be in green, because you can never create more space.
I would say yes, that's that.
Unless CPC changes their. So then I guess I wouldn't necessarily agree with that matrix, because if we're talking about the same number of cases in the community, but we have to open with 50% because of the 6-foot distancing, if people are insistent on that, we still should be able to have remote preferred but hybrid small groups able to meet. We should still be able to have just masks, not additional PPE. I mean, if we're opening on a yellow purely because of distancing and not because of community cases or school cases, then the matrix, then green really becomes blue and yellow really becomes green, but with 6 feet.
Okay, you're confusing me, but I agree.
You know what I mean?
I agree
If
with
we're
your
basing
premise.
it on community spread right now, green is where we're at, and that is scientifically just the way it is. We have very low cases in New Hampshire right now, today. So if we're saying that we're in green now and people still aren't okay with that as it's written in this matrix, then there is no blue. I mean,
I think I'm understanding you, and I think I would say yes.
okay.
Because, again, I look at guidance, that was my first statement. I look and read guidance, I have perceptions, I have my background as a science person. I read all the guidance. If community transmission is low, and you have people wearing masks, then 3 feet of distance is not going to spread, is not going to be much difference than 6 feet of difference as far as virus spread. That's in guidance coming from CDC, that's the guidance coming from AAP, that's in the state guidance. That's why they made it 3. Now, the cynical person, and I've heard this, would say, no, they made it 3 feet because the politicians are pushing for schools to be open because they have to reopen the economy. There really should be 6 feet, but we only needed 3 because we're pushing to open schools. That perception is out there, but I think I have found guidance from scientific sources that says 3 feet with a mask is acceptable when community transition is low.
Well, that's also my understanding from our 2 medical professionals on board.
That's my feeling, and my boy going to camp, and they don't have masks, and I feel comfortable with that. They're playing indoors and outdoors and keeping some space. 3 feet with masks on, makes me very comfortable. It's not gonna make everybody comfortable, but, and we have I think a terrific plan you guys have put together, I commend you all. A plan that allows those who are not comfortable to remain home. So I think it's a good plan. It's the only way we can get back to some degree of normalcy to get our students back in school. For those who feel comfortable doing so, to spend their students to be in school and to have the option to be home from home if they need to.
Let me address, I said I wouldn't address every comment, but a lot of the comments, there was a theme and a question that we received tonight in emails. Who decides the matrix? So I'd like to know from the board and from Dr. Cascadden, when it says community spread low, let's add a source, right? Few school cases reported. We need the nurses, I assume, are going to track those numbers. How's the matrix going to be executed, and from who?
Excellent question, Jared. I think it's open. One, I think those numbers have to be filled in. What is the percentage that means low community spread? What is the percentage or number of cases means low spread there? We talked about it at the very beginning. I'm comfortable as the administrator making that decision.
Okay.
When I call a snow day, I don't sleep the night before. I would also be comfortable having the SAU executive committee or even an SAU board, although it gets harder with that because then you have to warn a meeting, call a meeting to make that decision. I would love to have help making that decision. It's a huge decision on changing the level. So I know I may not be answering your question.
Let's take that part by part, because I like what you said. So is the board okay to authorize Dr. Cascadden, and I would offer the help of the executive committee because there's too much.
That's a separate issue from the motion that we're currently.
Well, is it?
We're still clarifying.
Still clarifying?
What the,
But the board has to adopt the motion. All right.
Let's do this then. Let's do this. Let's focus on the motion at hand. Is everyone comfortable with the matrix? Let's vote on the matrix, and then let's focus on execution as a second motion. I'm fine with that.
Well, I'm just curious because I don't want to get into two motions deep because I feel like this board needs to approve who's going to approve what operational status.
I think we're still talking about the TBD. I mean, that's the only reason. I know what you mean. Can I make I guess an ask? I asked that Jenna Reardon and Eric Schulman be involved in that decision.
Say the same thing.
Frankly,
All of you guys.
I'd much rather see them than the 3 of us clowns.
Very available.
Just because you guys are so much more knowledgeable on stuff.
I think that would make the most. I also have access to Dr. Noble, who's the infectious disease doc, who's been advising me a lot on this way that I can, last minute text or email if he's very responsive.
I would like to flesh that out early next week. So if you can lay out to him what we're thinking and what his thoughts would be on that number. I also have a call on Monday that I'll be sitting in with Dr. Chan and Frank Edelblum. I hope that I'll get some good information out of that over what's going on. I guess my question now is, the board, I thought, was discussing a motion about whether or not to approve the plan concept. Is that motion, is this part of the discussion of that motion?
Yeah.
Yes, because of the TBD. and
Oh, the
boxes in the condition.
I mean, we can approve the matrix understanding, that's to be determined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And does anyone on the board have any objection with whatever we decide as a smaller committee or group, that those decisions can be made without the full 10-person board?
Are you talking about to move from color to color?
Or, yes, or decide what a low is.
Yes.
So if it's Jenna, Eric, and Dr. Cascan, we're all in, okay. All right, let's vote on the motion.
Jeff, do you have any?
Jeff?
Yeah, Jared, just one thing. I think the board should give the superintendent the authority to establish the level upon consultation with this committee. I don't think the subcommittee, I should say. It shouldn't be the subcommittee deciding. It should be the administrator. The administrator makes the decision upon consultation. That's my recommendation.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, as everyone is clear as I am, what is on the table?
Yes.
Yes.
Are we putting that into part of the motion?
I don't think you can.
No, I think.
No, I think the motion is solid, it's just how it's implemented, we're gonna discuss. Okay, all in,
Separate motion to give Dr. C.
we will. We will.
All right, roll call.
All right, all in favor, Jeff Drexler?
Do you want to review the?
Jeff Moody?
Yes.
Clem Madden?
Yes.
Eric Schulman?
Yes.
Nicole Sloan?
Yes.
Jenna Reardon?
Yes.
Jennifer Strong Rain?
Yes.
Bryce Larrabee?
Yes.
Martin Oswald?
Yes.
Jared Duncan? Yes.
Sure. We're taking it as two ways now, because we have redundancy. If Wendy online, could you just restate the motion, because Shannon's.
That actually, you said the motion best,
Is
so.
it the original motion that Clem?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You need it again?
Did you get it?
Yes, she got
it.
Then I think there's going to be another motion that Jeff basically just made.
Yes, now we're gonna address the second piece, which is, go ahead, who wants, you wanna make that motion, Clem?
Jeff, can you?
Jeff, restate your motion on the authority for Dr. Cascadden.
You talking to me?
Yes.
I would make a motion that the SAU board authorize the superintendent to determine which level we should be at upon consultation with a subcommittee consisting of, and fill in the names.
Jenna Reardon, Eric Schulman.
Okay.
And you, Jared.
And Jared,
Chairman.
yeah. We'll put it on there.
We need a second first.
Need a poll? Okay.
Yes.
Second.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Jeff Drexler?
Yes.
Jeff Moody?
Yes.
Clem Madden?
Yes.
Eric Schulman?
Yes.
Nicole Sloan?
Yes.
Jenna Reardon?
Yes.
Jen Strong Rain?
Yes.
Bryce Larrabee?
Yes.
Martin Oswald?
Yes.
Jared Duncan? Yes. Okay. Whew. Most motions ever had at the SAU level.
I suggest, I'm trying to clarify in mind what we've done. Okay?
One,
I'm just trying to clarify what we've done. I think we've approved the plan and concept. I think we had, when this motion was made about level decision, I believe that's when we are changing levels. It's also to develop a rubric that we need to look at for the levels. I don't believe we've made a decision of whether we're opening in green or opening in yellow right now. We're developing a rubric for that. When the board approved the matrix, have we approved that the green level is 3 to 6 feet and the yellow level is 6?
We did, because we approved it as drafted. So.
Okay. So I guess, I don't know what other motions you need to make at this time. What I would say is we should probably set a second meeting, because there's going to be feedback There's going to be additional operationalization. There's going to be survey with real data fit out. And I think you've given good direction of where we should go and where we're now. But I think we also need to set another meeting. We'll be closer to the opening of school. We'll have plans further developed, and we'll have a lot of input. I guess the way I've seen these evolve, Pembroke met, said we're going all remote. And the community erupted. And so we put it out there. There's been a lot to digest. I just don't want to say, back the board into a corner.
No.
And so I think we should set another meeting so that you can get a further update on the plan. And if we need to rethink or need to do anything, that would be good.
I'm in full agreement, but I feel like we need to come, I don't want to drop that date because there's so much fluidity in all of this, but in fairness for our families and fairness for our staff, there needs to be a point where we can say, yes, this is where we're going. We're going green, we're going yellow, because yellow is very different than green. So if parents are trying to plan, they need to know, am I going to do 2 days of remote learning, or am I going to be able to send my child? So I think there's a very delicate balance of making sure we are having the most up-to-date data to make the most informed decision, but also making sure that we're not pushing this another 2 to 3 weeks and parents are not knowing what's happening in their
Do you think we
life.
should plan to have a meeting shortly after a week from now? We have the data, the input from the community and plan to make that decision at that time? That wouldn't be too far out if we have the input. But I agree, I think we should make that decision soon. It might change before school opens if the data changes, but in the meantime, we should make that decision, I think, close to a week from now, so that families who do need to inform their employers whether they're coming to work or not, et cetera, can make those decisions.
I would be very comfortable having another meeting next Thursday night. I think there's going to be a lot of work done in this next week and a number of different fronts. And I think if you do, and besides that, the week after that, I'm hoping to take some time away from things. So I would love to be able to set a meeting for next Thursday. Update, if we can get the actual survey done Monday with the administrators, we'll have some more data from our community that says, I'm choosing X, Y, and Z. The board will have a chance to go and look at the community feedback that has come in. And also the community feedback that's going to come in other ways to use, I'm sure. And there's also some employment issues that we have to discuss in non-public tonight. And then we may have a further resolution of those employment issues by the time we talk next Thursday.
I agree 100%. I wasn't going to go any further. It's a good segue and get some more feedback. There's a lot of comments, a lot of questions to answer. So let the people with the most knowledge review them. And you got a week, right?
Are we setting a meeting for next Thursday?
August 6th. Do we want to do something a little earlier so we're not here till 10 o'clock?
Well, I don't think we will be because it won't be the presentation.
Okay.
And if people could come earlier, I'd love it.
Yeah, I don't know that I can get there any earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so 6 o'clock is still good with everyone? Okay. 6 o'clock, August 6th, same room. Any other issues to discuss? Or I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Jennifer's trying to get on the
I already put it right in.
At this point, we do have to have a roll call vote of the both school board to go into a non-public session to discuss issues involving personnel. Yes?
We adjourn ours and.
No, I think you gotta do, whoa, that's a good question. Because then
You have to what?
we gotta adjourn ours first.
Yes, you have to adjourn your meeting, but then the both school board has to stick around and make a motion. This is a warrant meeting, you have to stick around and go into a non-public just for vote.
So I make a motion to adjourn the SAU 68-7 board.
Second. All in favor?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Jeff Trexler.
Yes.
Jeff Moody.
Aye.
Clem Madden.
Yes.
Eric Schulman.
Aye.
Nicole Sloan.
Yes.
Jenna Reardon.
Yes.
Jen Stryver.
Yes.
Bryce Larrabee.
Yes.
Brian Russell.
Yes.
Derek Duncan. Yes. No objection to leaving except those who are to stay. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Yeah.
Roy, would you shut down the feed, please?
Thank you, administrators.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.